Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand under the company Horns of Odin, and today I'm joined by Margrethe Havgar, and we're going to be discussing the Gjellestad Viking ship burial.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, almost right. It's Gjellestad. I think some people. Yeah, Gjelle. But
why did you correct me on air? You waited until we were on air before you were like, yeah, perfect.
Yeah, but then you just dropped a little ing there at the end.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
It was the nerves.
Yeah, happens all the time.
I used to have a co-host who used to take care of all the names.
And now you're all on your own?
Yeah, Matthias was Danish and he could pronounce everything perfectly, and he got too busy, and now I have to struggle through all the names with this accent that I have that sounds like I've got marbles in my mouth. So
well, I honestly think you're doing a splendid job, and we're the ones being dicks over here, putting G's and D's everywhere. So
you put letters all over the place, like you've got the E on the end of your name, which threw me.
Yep, it throws pretty much everyone who isn't Scandinavian or Northern European in some sort of way.
So why doesn't it have like the little affliction?
Well, if you pronounce it in Norwegian, it's Margrethe, so then you pronounce the E. But I guess you could say Margrethe or Margrethe in English, but to me that just sounds weird. So I just go by the closest whatever. And it does derive from the same origin as Margaret. No, honestly, you could, if you want to use it, I'm being nice to you, but to be completely honest, it's more that I don't like the sound of it.
Oh, yeah. Well, fair enough then. Fair enough. Okay, so we're going to talk to what the ship burial in, I'm scared to say it now.
Gjellestad?
The Gjellestad. No, so we're going to talk that one in specific. You were an archaeologist that worked on the excavation?
Yep, that's true. Yeah, that's correct.
Wonderful.
I was the dissemination coordinator. So basically the fancy word for saying that I was the one who was talking about it, making sure people knew what was going on. So I didn't really do that much digging.
Okay.
But, yeah.
So is that the more important job, the person who?
Oh no,
oversees,
I would not say that. No. It was
I'll
more like I was part of the
important.
team. Thank you. That's very nice. I will not by any means claim that.
Okay.
But it was, my contract was originally 50% excavating and 50% disseminating, but we figured quite early on, I think my first week, I just said, if we're going to make this work the way we want to make it work, I need to do 100% dissemination, and then I can help out if there's a need. So sometimes I did get to help out, but then it kind of became like an inside joke kind of a thing where I was more, I think they started calling me the in-house paparazzi or something at some point. And then when I actually did get to excavate a little bit, they'd be like, "Oh, are you actually an archaeologist?" I'd be like, "Ha ha ha ha." Yeah, very funny. No, but it was a ton of fun. It was great.
I imagine it was. I'm still struggling. So you just made sure everybody was in the right place. Is that right?
No, I tried to. I guess I took kind of anthropologic / ethnographic approach where I tried to intervene as little as possible, and mostly took pictures. My job was kind of a merge between outreach and letting people know what was going on, because this was a huge thing at the time that it was happening, but also kind of an in-house documentation of the work going on. So my job was just as much grabbing pictures and video of what was happening and at the time it happened, but also making sure to document how we were doing things, because this was the first excavation of its kind since 1904. And at the time, we do have some photographs, and in that team's defense, they did a really good job considering the documentational kind of tools they had available, but it's not the same that we have today. So it was just as much focus on making sure that for later, we have documentation of how we did stuff, in addition to what we did.
Is that usual that like an archaeologist would take care of taking photos of everything? Because the naivety of me, I've just been like a layperson, I would just assume that like a project like this would have like a media team that would be, but then I don't know, is that silly? Am I silly for thinking that?
It's absolutely not silly. I also think this really This really depends on what type of excavation you're at, what type of funding we're talking, how long it's going to last for, and also what country you're in, what the like structure is usually like. So luckily in Norway, it's becoming more and more common to have a person responsible for disseminating, is essentially what we call it. At least as part of their job, like having one person having to do that as either their full job or partly. And I think, I don't want to say that I don't think I was the first full-time disseminator, but I think my job kind of evolved as we went along, and we had to kind of figure out what we were doing as we were doing it, because although this was a very big excavation, a very important excavation, with considering comparatively to other things, it had a good amount of funding, but it still wasn't a lot of cash comparatively. So you'd think we'd have a big media team. We didn't, but I kind of like that too. I mean, I don't want to like toot my own horn here, but I worked quite closely with the team themselves. I mean, I was part of the team, and also the project manager called Christian Rødsrud, Christian Rødsrud. And I remember him and I having a discussion at one point where there was something to be said for an archaeologist being the one taking the picture, because just taking video and photos in and of itself is subjective, right? So I tried to make sure, like, for example, we had a couple of beads pop up at one point, and they were located quite closely to one of the walls of the burial chamber, if I'm not misremembering this. And I tried to make sure that at least in some of the photos, I did grab the angle of the wall and like where it was going, to not just have a picture of the beads in the ground where they were found, but also kind of their location and their position in relation to the rest of the site.
No, that makes, that does. As soon as I said it before, I was like, it does make complete sense that you would, somebody with the correct training, because if you let me in there taking pictures, there'd be all sorts cut off, there'd be parts missing, and it'd just be like a close-up of the item. I mean, I wouldn't think of like the surroundings as well, which I guess is so important to what we find, and maybe understanding what we find.
Yeah, sure, but I think it's definitely a relevant discussion to have, because I don't think either case, like a media team or an archaeologist, should be just kind of the default. I think there's definitely something to be said for having a discussion and knowing why you choose to do the thing that you do. But that being said, I was in-house, but we also had a ton of media come, and there's, I think the documentary is out now. I should have looked it up, what it's called, but we did have a French documentary maker who visited us quite regularly and followed the progress of the excavation. I don't know exactly what it's called, but should be easy enough to find. Yeah.
We'll find it and just put it in the show notes. Don't worry. Oh, yeah, magic. There's someone smarter than me will find it, and then we'll put it in the show notes.
Amazing. I love it.
By someone smarter, I mean Rowan. I might as well give him his credit for doing that.
Thank you, Rowan.
he will take care of it.
This used to be my whole job. So every time you say someone else will work it out, I'm like, yes. I don't have to look up that one thing.
It's not me. So, okay, we do have to talk about the actual ship itself, but I go down rabbit holes like this and I get fascinated. How much are you allowed to just like take a little snap and post it on Instagram? Because that's what I would want to do. I'd just be like, look, cool bead. And there's just me there pointing at a bead like, this bead's really cool. And then...
Well, it wasn't...
Like, is that allowed? I don't... Obviously,
it depends on the dig in the management, I'd say. But the thing is too, with Norwegian digs like this, they're mostly state funded or like through their trickle. Like, so it is, what we're doing is public work. So there's very little that's under like lock and key kind of thing where you could get in serious trouble, but it's more kind of a sense of being like a sense of courtesy of like just checking, like, is this info that we want online immediately? Because sometimes it's not like it's strictly not allowed, but it's more kind of like, maybe we want to hang on to this a bit more before we publish it, just so we know exactly what we're talking about.
Okay, yeah.
just to kind of, because we're representing our employer, the Museum of Cultural History in Oslo, which is owned by the University of Oslo, which is owned by the Ministry of Higher Education. And so we want to make sure that we do our job correctly, you know?
Yeah. And I guess it's the same with everything. The news is always bigger than the rebuttal. So if you did put something out that wasn't right and you then came back and released it, you kind of already opened
it's a
Pandora's
bit
box,
hard to put out those fires. And we were very aware, the ship being what it was and the discovery being what it was, that it could very quickly get out of hand, or the narrative get changed in a way that wasn't, not that we wanted to control any sort of narrative as such, but we wanted to make sure that we didn't start any fires that there wasn't any basis to start, for example. So I was always very careful when we were talking about if there were any remains there, how I phrased it, what words I used, just to make sure that it didn't come across as something that it wasn't. If that makes sense. That's very vague, but at the same time, I hope that it makes sense what I'm trying to get at.
I get that, because for the general public, for me as well, it's like you hear, oh, they found a ship, it's buried. It's like, it's another Osberg ship. Like it's another, that's like that everybody's mind just goes to like that. It's like, it's this beautiful ship. It's going to have all this importance. It's going to have this, first of all, like the Osberg ship having the female people, the two female bodies. They still bodies.
Remains,
remains on there. Like it's just such a cool thing. And then so everybody automatically just goes, it's another Viking burial ship. It's going to be really awesome. And I guess you have to manage.
That was exactly what happened. Yeah.
So you have to manage that expectation of like, okay, we need to, and I guess, but that must be hard as well, because inside you almost secretly be like, oh my God, what the fuck have we found here? This is amazing. What's it going to be? But you also externally have to be like, no, we don't know. Let's wait until we've dug it all out.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the most challenging but also most fun parts of my job was the fact that in comparison to Oseberg or Gokstad or Tuna, the three pretty decently preserved Viking ships that we have in Norway, which I'm pretty sure still top the top three best preserved Viking ships in the world. Just putting that in there. Are if you compare the Gjellestad to those, you're looking at a patch of dirt that's a slightly darker than the other surrounding patches of dirt. So that was the challenging but fun part of my job, was being able to tell the story of kind of telling people both online, but also I did host a bunch of tours in person at the site, of being like, sure, this isn't the Oseberg, but I'm gonna tell you why it's cool, even though it doesn't look the way you supposed it would.
Yeah, I like that, because do you ever get people just see the discoloration in dirt, as you put it, and just be like, oh, thought it was going to be a perfectly preserved ship that was going to look exactly the same as when we put it. Then when they put it in the ground, they think it's going to look exactly like that. No. It goes to first say during the majority of the tours that I hosted, that there was a slight percentage of people who had that reaction, but for that precise reason, I started out every tour stating very clearly, this is not the Oseberg. And so this excavation was a bit, I guess I'm jumping all over the place, but you'll have to just kind of correct me if you wanted me to do more of a structured kind of retelling of this thing. But essentially, this was a bit of a different type of excavation than we normally do, because there was funding put in place to have a kind of a construction tent mounted over the site, so that we weren't, or I say we, but it was not for the sake of the team, it was for the sake of the find, wasn't like exposed to the weather patterns, and tried to lessen temperature influence as much as we could. I mean, during the winter, the excavation extended into almost up until Christmas. We did have to start pumping warm air into it, but heating up a construction tent requires a lot of energy. And I bet.
Yeah. but my point in mentioning that was that I'd always start the tours outside of the construction tent, and then I'd give the groups a bit of info on the surrounding area and kind of work my way up to this ship. So they hadn't actually seen the ship unless they'd looked online before they'd come. And then the last thing I'd mentioned before we entered was, remember, this is not the Oseberg ship. And I would be very candid with them that when you come inside, it might just look like a patch of dark dirt.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I remember during one of the groups, I might be smushing a couple together, but I remember quite early on there were, when we had exposed more of the ship and more of the outline of it was visible, at least to our trained eyes. There were a couple of kids in one of the groups that I had where I saw we came in, and it wasn't that they were disappointed as such, but they just didn't get it. That like they couldn't visualize it. And how? I mean, poor things. Like, how could they possibly, especially like if you're a little bit older, maybe I think these kids were maybe like somewhere around like 3-4 different kids, maybe between like 6 and 12 or something.
Yeah. And they've been told they're going to see a Viking ship. A Viking ship.
Exactly. So I remember like seeing this, like where they so desperately wanted to understand what I was talking about, but they just couldn't. Yeah. So we had this rule on site where, to lessen the kind of the impact as much as we could on the site, when you were on the site, you couldn't wear your actual boots that we usually wear when we excavate, that are like construction type boots, because they have a very like hard metal sole. But so we wore these little very cute like suede slippers. Yeah, okay. It was a vibe. And at that point, like I didn't have my slippers available, and I was standing at the edge of the site. And I remember just like kicking my shoes off and just walking out in just my socks. And a couple of my colleagues just looked up at me going like, what the fuck is she doing? Like, why is she just walking out there? And I grabbed, because I'm vain as hell, even though I didn't excavate, I had my trowel in my pant pocket of my.
I imagine that archaeologists carry those with them all the time, everywhere you go. Of course, like
you've got it for anything.
You've got it within hand's reach right now, I bet.
Well, it's right outside on like my under my TV. Yeah,
it's there, ready to go. Yeah,
I can go grab it if you want.
There's something need, actually, you're ready. It's something need digging.
Yeah,
there in hand.
So exactly. So I remember I kicked my shoes off and I walked in just my socks over to, I was standing on one of the ends, or I guess you'd call it like, this would be what we assumed was the back end of the ship, where it kind of came into a pointed little triangle. I can show you pictures later and kind of explain a bit more what I mean.
Yeah.
And I stood next to it, careful not to stand on it, and I took my trowel out, and I remember I knelt down and I looked the kids like directly in their face. And I was like, do you see this patch of dirt? And I pointed to the outside of the ship. They're like, yeah. And I was like, I described the color to them just to make sure that I was, they were still following what I was saying. And they were like, yes. And then I see, do you see this darkened patch? And they're like, yeah, no, the darkened patch is because this is wood that has rotted away. That's why the ground is that color. And then I started to trace the outline with my trowel, careful not to touch the ground too much. And I was like, so here you see the pointed end. That's where the ship stops. And then I put my trowel back in my pocket, and I like, while I was standing back up slowly, I just started like motioning with my hands, like making like the shape of the ship. Like, so the ship would have gone this way, all the way. I'm like, started making all these like ridiculous gestures, and I could just see the kids being more and more like,
was there any temptation to do Kate Winslet in Titanic?
Actually, no. Like, I wasn't wearing like
that's what I would have done. 100%. I would have just been on the back.
Such a missed opportunity. Why did I never do that?
That's
honestly,
what I would have.
To my colleagues, it probably looked like that a little bit. I won't lie.
maybe.
I think they had a ton of fun, because after like that tour where that happened, I continued doing that because I could tell that for the adults that resonated really well as well. Because it's something about like someone giving you something to hold on to and like showing you.
And people, the thing is that people are scared to ask as well. That's the one thing I love with this.
Really unfortunate.
With this podcast is like that I get to ask the questions and I get to hide my stupidity behind other people. So I can be like, yeah, I don't really want to ask this question, but other people might want to know it. But really, I just want to know. But it's like I get to ask the questions, and I do try to do it as like think of people who never. This could be their first every podcast is somebody's first podcast. So I try to like put my mind in that place and ask the questions, and I've kind of got over any resemblance of embarrassment, because that's what we're all here for. We're here to just learn, and if I don't know something, I ask. But people do have that fear, particularly maybe in that very serious setting. There's this, amazing find. Everyone's excited and everyone's like looking at it and probably buzzing a little bit, and they're looking at it like, just like, this is dirt. Like, I don't get it, but they don't want to ask.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. So I tried to make the setting as casual as possible. So I tried to like use very, like, sometimes I had to use more like terminology to explain stuff, but tried to be as vernacularly inclined, I guess you could say, as possible.
You can say dumb it down.
Yeah,
I'll say it.
Well, here's the thing though. I have kind of like a pet peeve with dumbing it down, because I feel like I'm doing myself as a communicator a disservice, because I don't want to underestimate my audience. But instead of like dumbing it down, I want to try to figure out how can I say the exact same thing without using that word. That why on earth would they necessarily know that word? Mm-hmm. How can I explain it in just a different way? And sometimes that is legitimately dumbing it down, but other times I think it's a very healthy challenge for me as well, to be able to talk about stuff in a way that is, I don't know, accessible.
No, that's good. And that's why it makes like these episodes so good, where we can sit and have a very easy conversation. Because like I said before, like sometimes I get scholars on, and it's like I'm trying to pull information from them because it's all very kind of scholarly. And the whole reason of this podcast is trying to break that boundary kind of between the two worlds, because it is so easy, I think, for scholars to get wrapped up in like talking to other scholars and assuming a certain level of knowledge
100%.
when everyone else is just like, huh? What?
What?
Yeah, what? What are you saying?
Yeah, and then if you just like frame it slightly differently, then they're like, oh.
Yeah, it's not that they don't understand. It's just that they maybe don't understand the terminology, and it's just like, okay, just explain that to me a second.
No, but I was like, a previous partner of mine was a paramedic, and sometimes they would say things a certain way, and I was like, what?
Yeah.
And they'd just say, that means puke. And I'm like, oh, well, but okay.
Just say that. Yeah,
just say puke. But it was a very good like reminder of me going, I probably do the exact same thing.
Yeah, well, yeah, but exactly.
Honestly, I love this podcast for that exact reason, because I hadn't known about it for that long, but this is honestly very great. This is stuff that I live for. So
wonderful. Yeah. Okay, let's try and
stay on track. Yeah.
Stay on track, and let's try to get some information about the ship. Okay, what you said, like we were jumping all over the place. Do you have like a plan of where you feel would be the best place to start, informational wise, assuming everybody listening to this, it's their first like introduction to this ship? Like, why was it so exciting? What made it so kind of the thing?
Yeah, I guess I can give like kind of a brief-ish summary type timeline.
Yeah.
Thingy.
Let's summarize 20 minutes in.
Okay, right. Cool. Great. I love it. Well, essentially, what happened was that the Norwegian Institute for Cultural Heritage Research, they've been doing a bunch of ground penetrating radar analyses, a bunch of different places. And that essentially means that they send, I am not an expert in ground penetrating radar, so if anyone is an expert listening to this, I'm sorry if I butcher my explanation of this, but this is kind of how I understand it. So essentially it's like, it's the same but different type of version of sonar in a way, where you send waves down and then you get an image back depending on what you hit. And I think the technology is evolving quite quickly from what I've understood.
It seems to be popping up all over the place. Like so many different places are now. And as we mentioned before, there's the new kind of ship that people are talking about in Stavanger. I'm sure that was
No, it was
ground penetrating radar as well.
Yeah, it was. I double checked that because I was like, what kind of ship are we talking? Are we talking Oseberg? Or are we talking one of mine? I was about to say like Gjellestad, and it was Gjellestad. Yeah, it was Gjellestad. Yeah, I heard
it stinks. Nowhere near as good. Stinks. Rubbish. Until I have somebody on who worked on it, and I'm like, it's the best ship ever.
This is hilarious, and at the same time, I'm slightly scared that someone will take that personally. No, but
who am I? So okay, I'll preface it. I'm only joking. The ship is. I mean, all ships are
all ship
beautiful.
finds are
all ships are
amazing.
made equal, and they're all
In
beautiful.
all shapes and sizes. We love all Viking ships.
They're
Yes.
all beautiful in their own right.
But the reason I mentioned that with ground penetrating radar was that mostly so far, from what I've understood, they do it on flattened fields because that's when you get the most readable images.
Okay, yeah.
Because if you have more kind of a terrainy type terrain, then it's harder to read the images and understanding exactly what you're looking at. But I've understood the hope is that the technology evolves so that they can actually start doing that to actual burial mounds that haven't been open yet to see what's happening. But any case, so this area was analyzed using ground penetrating radar, and the thing with Norway is that a lot of burial mounds were constructed on what is fairly suitable farmland. So before any heritage laws were in place, it was a very common practice to plow down the mounds. And the archaeologist in me, that hurts my heart a little bit. But at the same time, who am I to tell a farmer in the 1800s to not feed his kids?
And I assume they don't understand what's in there either.
Yeah, and even if they did, it'd be kind of like if we didn't have the culture of, conserving cultural history that we do today, who's to say that I wouldn't be like, hey, look, like an old thingy that Dad found when he was making sure that we'd have carrots for the winter. Isn't that cool? So, I mean, we don't exactly know what happened at Gjellestad, but we know that the mound was plowed down somewhere in, I think it was the 1860s or the 1880s. And there are like stories of like a boat that was burnt somewhere or like ship parts appearing. But the thing is, we've heard a bunch of different stories, but we haven't really been able to pin any of them down to know exactly what happened.
Okay.
And so this has been used as a potato field since pretty much. And then the images came back and they started seeing these ring formations on the images, which indicates that there's a mound underneath here, or was at some point a mound here. If you get these very circular, kind of like a coffee stain, like if you put your cup of coffee on something and it stains, it's kind of similar to that. And in one of those circles, there was a very prominent, I guess you could say like a imprint of a sort of almost like a cat's pupil, like elongated with narrow ends in both sides inside one of those mounds. And I'm paraphrasing here, and I don't want to kind of misrepresent what happened, but essentially, in summary, it was a bit, from what I've understood, that people analyzing the image were a bit like, it kind of looks like a ship, though, doesn't it? I mean, and then they double checked like the sizing and everything. And it was like, yeah, that really looks like a ship, man. It really does. And the bottom part, what would be the keel, or I loved how National Geographic explained it in a recent article where they said the spine of the ship, so like the bottom plank in the middle. I was like, that is a great way of saying it.
Yeah, but I feel like Nat Geo should know the proper name for it, unless they
they said keel, and then and then spine, and like
no, I thought they were like just it's just the spine.
Oh no! I should have said that.
It's fine.
It was a way of kind of making sure. I mean, if you float on your back in a pool or in the ocean, it kind of, your spine kind of becomes like a keel, I guess.
Yeah.
So there was this one line going through the image of this cat's pupil, if you will. And it was like, well, does that mean that the keel is preserved since we get this very like clear image of a line through the ship?
I guess that does that make it more exciting?
Because that makes it more exciting because that indicates that there might be something there and not just a trace of something that was once there.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Because that means that the radar hit something that responded back.
Yeah.
Hit physical mass, essentially, from what I understand. And so these images were made public, and there was a whole hoopla in 2018. And then there was an preliminary survey or survey that took place the following year in 2019 to see if this line that they saw on the images was actually the keel and if it was actually there.
Mhm.
And then lo and behold, they find it.
Yeah.
There it is. And
it did its job.
It did its job. They were like, it was like, hey, look at me, I'm here.
Yeah. Okay. So they find the ship. They
find the keel. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So they
find the ship on the images. Sorry. Yes, I got ahead of myself there.
So they mapped the area. They found the ship, and then see the line, and then they go, okay, we're gonna dig here. Is that how?
Just to see whether or not we can actually find it. So
I guess they dig like a little area,
like a little ditch, just kind of like a perpendicular line going straight across it. So from the images, they could see that for farming purposes, there had been dug a bunch of drainage trenches through the field. So they placed this survey trench. The trench is what we call it when we excavate, like the site that we're actually digging in is the trench. So they lined up this trench with one of the drains, essentially going through the field, so that in case that there was something there, they wouldn't damage it more than it kind of had already been damaged in a bit.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Just to cover their bases a little bit. And I mean, which was a very sound strategy, if you ask me. But and then they hit goal or oak.
Oak.
Yeah.
Metaphorical gold.
Metaphorical gold, indeed. So they took a little sample of it, like cut off a piece of it.
So when you said they, at this point, when they hit oak, like actual wood.
Piece of wood.
Okay, so it wasn't all just discolored dirt.
Like an actual piece of wood that you could hold in your gloved hand. Or somewhat, yeah.
Okay, but not a ship.
Well, from what I understand, I wasn't involved in the preliminary survey, so I don't know. But from what I understand, the goal wasn't to see whether or not the ship was there. The point was to see whether or not the keel was there, and then they could work from there. And the reason for that is that the keel was close enough to the surface from the images that they could tell from very early on that if there's anything left of the ship, it is only the bottom part.
Okay.
That's left.
That's kind of what had me confused, because I'm like, the keel's underneath, right? So wouldn't you have to like go through all the ship to get to it? Or did they bury it upside down? Because that sounds really odd. Sure, that would be very special.
That would have been super special.
I'm like,
how does that work?
Yeah. That's why I was a little bit confused.
Well, it's a good thing that you asked about that, because I was wanting to touch on that, because that was one of the things that I also tried to make very clear, and that we worked a lot to make people aware of, is the fact that we don't have the whole ship, and we never thought that we would get the whole ship because the mound is gone.
Yeah.
And the reason we don't think we would get the whole ship because the mound is gone is that essentially, from what we know from other ship burial sites that have been excavated, is that it seems that there was a very common practice that when this burial was happening, they figured out where they wanted to place the mound. And then I suppose in order to avoid the ship keeling over or having to have too many secondary supports, there was this little kind of ditch that was dug ahead of the ship being placed there, so that it would kind of cradle the ship a little bit.
Yeah, that makes absolute perfect sense.
Yeah, and then they constructed the mound above. So the result then being that if the mound is plowed away, a lot of the ship would have been plowed away, with the mound being eliminated.
But okay, now you're explaining it like this. That farmer must have known.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, but was anything ever like reported to say like maybe there's something here, or is it just a case of like, if I report it, then they're gonna come and shut down my farm, and then?
Well, not as such, because there weren't really any laws in place that would cause that to happen at that point. Still not exactly the case. There's a big misconception there, but I won't get into that because that's a whole different conversation. But from what I understood, didn't really seem like that big a deal. Or maybe they found something cool and they're like, hey, firewood, or hey, look at this cool thing. And then
that
over
must be so
time,
frustrating.
over time, it disintegrated. We do have, this is from a way different place up in Norway that I can't exactly remember the precise location of now, embarrassingly. But there is a story that was recounted by or written down by a priest where a local community had excavated a mound and found a preserved ship, and were really awed by it, and kind of left it out because what else would you do with the big ass ship just kind of appearing out of the ground? And I don't exactly know what the context was there, why they were even digging into the mound, just for funsies, or if they were planning on plowing it away. But this was in the 1700s.
Okay.
So the ship eventually, from what we understand, brought it away, as it would.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So from the get-go, if you kind of imagine the ship like sitting in the mound like this, and then I guess if I use like this line behind me, like you have the ditch there.
Yeah.
And then, so we never expected to find more than this.
Nice improvisation there.
I work with what I got. I work with what I got.
You got it. I mean, I love it.
So essentially, we always like imagine we'd find this part, the grayed out part, like between my hands. That's the part that we were focused on, that we hoped we would find. And I guess that is what we found. It wasn't as well preserved as we hoped that it would be, but we weren't ever very, very hopeful that any sort of Oseberg situation would be there.
You must have been. There must have been a little bit. You
always hope.
Yeah, there must have been a little bit.
You always hope. I can't say that I won't, but at the same time, I mean, I guess I'm jumping in the timeline here, but it does kind of fit with the whole thing, is that the conditions were also completely different. For one, the mound is gone, so any protective layer would be gone. And in comparison to Oseberg, this like just the climate surrounding it is very different. So the incline in the field right here drains a lot. So there's a lot of moisture coming in and then going back out. So, and we noticed that when we were, I say we, the team, where credit is due, was excavating as well. Where in the southern end, from what we think, I think it's been established that that was likely the front part or the prow of the ship.
Yeah.
Things were some, like, it would depend, but that part of the ground had been moistened for over longer periods of time because it was at the incline. But the back end would dry out more. And we saw that archaeologically speaking quite clearly also when we came. So like you can see that the water seeps in and out from just rain and seasonal changes. And especially when the mound was gone, that it would have been additionally exposed to that, both because of the plowing and reaping and sowing cycle, but also just from being like more not having that bulb on top of it.
I guess like the protection. Yep. And because having a mound is obviously going to help the rain runoff. Is going to protect it a lot. I really can't get over the fact that somebody's plowed that down and because we're not talking. Did you say in the 1800s? Yeah. So it's not got a fucking big combine harvester either. Like it's a horse and plow probably, maybe. Yeah. I think
we have
so
speculations
he's like
that there
really
must have
seen the bits of wood and been like, oh, fuck it, let's keep going. Yeah. But like you say, it's tough because it's like, what would I do? I'm like, if that's how I'm feeding my family, I'm going to feed my family. I'm going to feed myself. Yeah. So it's a tough position to be in. It's easy to sit here now and be like, oh, what a dick, man. Because we want it. But when it's your family and your kids that are going hungry, it's a little bit of a more different situation.
It is. So I think for me, it's been, I'm kind of partially arrived at this state of, I don't know what to call it, except like acceptance of like this happened, and then trying to kind of differentiate the two in my mind of being like, I can still be really annoyed that this happened without placing unwarranted judgment on that farmer's family who I know nothing about, and I have no idea what their situation was.
And there also is the possibility that he's just an asshole.
There is a possibility, but
it could have been a possibility they had loads of food and he was just like, fuck it. Fuck this shit.
This seems to have been, because here's the thing, is I'm on a bit of shaky ground here because I don't remember exactly the lineage of that farm, but there seems to have been an expansion onto that field at some very certain point, potentially to increase income and feeding the surrounding area and everything. Because the thing is that I sometimes forget to mention is that the Gjellestad mound was not the only mound. It is part of a larger complex. It's just the one mound that had traces of a ship in it, and that's why it was excavated. It is part of a bigger complex of, I think, close to 15 mounds on that one single field. And then north of the farm has now been analyzed with ground penetrating radar as a bigger kind of project related to the ship excavation, where they've also found a bunch of traces from mounds. So this seems like this area was almost like a burial site that was used for, we don't know exactly how long, but probably several centuries. I would hazard a guess, at least.
It is remarkable how many there is. Because again, for me as an outsider, you used to think there's like, it's just
one random mound.
Yeah,
just like
and then and you think that every mound has been excavated. It's like we're in 2023. Every mound has been excavated. That's like the way that, like, I would say most lay people's mind work is like, there's a mound there. Let's just go dig it and look and see what's in there. Because it's just you just assume it's that easy. But I think obviously, hopefully, people who've listened to this now realize it's not that easy.
It really isn't.
But I think also maybe this will help you bring a little bit of peace to your dilemma of not having the whole ship. But this is how I like to see things. That it's just when something like that happens, obviously it would be beautiful to have like the ship. Sure. But also it becomes when something like this happens, and the one that comes to mind is like the Notre Dame Cathedral. Sure. Like I never got to see it as it was. And I'm in one of the probably very few camps of people that thinks they should have just left it as it was rather than rebuilding it. Because I have this opinion of like, when these things happen, like it's not necessarily that you're losing something amazing, which you are, but you're also gaining something new. It becomes this new thing. And I have a hobby of like on a weekend, I like to go look around old sites, and most of them are ruins, but it doesn't make it any less special. It's like, it's just, it was this amazing thing at one point in time, but now it's just this new thing. It's just a different thing. It doesn't have to be what it once was. It's just now this new beautiful thing. And I think that's hopefully the same thing with the ship. Like it was once upon a time this perfect ship, and for whatever reason, it now became less of a ship due to plowing. But it's still a beautiful thing in its own right. It still has its own, well, huge significance.
Exactly. And at what point has anything ever been static, really? Even though we have this maybe fallacy of perceiving something as static. I mean, even though I don't know if this has become evident at all, but I do have a bit of a passion towards Viking ships. So regardless of how much I love the Oseberg and the Gokstad and the Tuna, they will inevitably fall apart and decompose regardless of what we do to them. The new museum that's being built is absolutely necessary. And I think that for very many and different purposes, they should be preserved, but that doesn't, change the fact that at some point they will no longer be here. And that is sad, but also look at me becoming philosophical. It's like
we're going in here, aren't we? What has happened to us?
Circle of life, man. Like, but at the same time, I like the way that you framed that, because it is sad because of what we could have had, but at the same time, now this is what we have. So let's try to figure that out. And that was a very cool part of the project from the onset as well. Like when the preliminary survey was done in 2019, and they immediately started analyzing the sample from the keel that they cut off and what we call extracted or taken out. Plans were put in motion quite quickly, from what I understand, where they wanted to see in what condition the wood was in and whether it would warrant any type of excavation. And what they found was that there was quite a large fungi attack on the wood. Okay. So there was fungus growing and spreading rapidly and deteriorating the wood. So the argument then for seeing whether or not we should excavate it was not necessarily let's stop this from doing, but if this is something we want to do, it needs to be done sooner rather than later, because this fungus is working at such a rapid speed. But if there is anything left that we want to find, now's the time, because in just a couple of years, it might not be there anymore because of this, the traces of this. And so the motion to do an excavation got put in place. I was not involved in any of this. I was just third partying it all the way. And then I became involved after the excavation had initially started in the summer of 2020. And then with the whole pandemic happening as well, everything was a bit of a mess, but we made it work really well, actually. I'm quite proud of us.
Yeah, good. No, people adapt. I don't think we give ourselves enough credit as a species to adapt when we need to. Or just humans in general. Like, we do adapt. Like, shit happens sometimes and we just figure out a way to figure it out, I guess. Yeah. And it's kind of harkening back to the thing that we were talking about previously with, okay, we could have had whatever, but this is what we have now. That was kind of the vibe that I got immediately as I became involved with the project as well, was our expectations and also our hopes. But then the angle pretty much was, okay, sure, there probably won't be as much left of this ship as we would have hoped. But that being said, not a single Viking Age ship burial has been excavated since Oseberg in 1904. Yeah. And to put that into perspective, Norway was not an independent country in 1904. Like, that's how long ago that was. So with that in mind, how can we document and excavate this using the technology that we have now in 2020? And what then can we tell? And the fun part about that is that with the technology, which in and of itself is a very vague term, but with the mapping technology and the pictures and scans and everything, we were quite certain from a very early point, and still are from what I've been able to ascertain from the project manager, that even though most of the ship has already deteriorated, from the things that we could find, which was a shit ton of rivets, like nails from the ship and where they were placed, we will be able to digitally reconstruct the entire thing. There we go. And that's quite amazing, isn't it? That is, yeah. I mean, that is absolutely bonkers. There's some smart people out there, isn't there? It really is. Like, don't ask me how they're going to do it, because I'll just give you 3D modeling things and math on a computer. But I don't know exactly how it works. Just radars. More radars. Yeah. And people that are good at programming and stuff. But that will be... That is a possibility, and not even a possibility, but a likelihood, and something that they're actively working on. We extracted close to 1,200 rivets. Wow. From the ship. Okay. And the cool thing with what they did too was that the team legitimately, with a local smith, they constructed this own tool that I can see if I can find a picture of it later, for extracting the rivet in the dirt, packed in the dirt that they were already in. Because encased. Like a little grabbing machine that compresses it all together. We literally called it the nail grabber. Oh. Or the nail jaw. I mean, Norwegians are very literal, aren't you? Yeah, we are. So let's just call a spade a spade. Yeah, you're going to call it exactly what it is. Yep. Whereas if it was British, we'd have a fun little name for it, probably. Yeah, probably. I mean, if it was the 1800s, we probably would have too. But we were like, here's what it is. This is what it does. There you go. Yeah. Yeah. But the reason they did that was both because the iron of the nails was, again, essentially what we found was the rust encased rivets or nails. So the actual iron is gone, but the rust is there and the rough shape is there. But by extracting it in the soil, we both avoided that the rivets would fall apart. Yeah.
Because they're very brittle, and also allowed for the potential kind of, I guess, replacement of the rivets. So the way that they're extracted, the way that they're packed, and the way that they're mapped and geolocated as they were being extracted, every single rivet can be put back in exactly the place they were found to kind of go back to the ship. If anything ever happens to the site, like a museum or a visitor center or anything of the like, we can put the things back and make it whole in a sense.
It's insane how...
Isn't that just crazy?
These things are documented. And again, it's like that thing going back to, imagine if they had this technology for so many other size boat. You can't really look at it like that, but we're going to have it for so many more going forward. Like sites like this get excavated because of new technology.
Yeah, we were able to do what we did because of that technology.
Yeah, it is absolutely amazing. You saying that reminds me of the episode I did with Julian of the Secrets of the Ice, of ice psychology, and he was saying how sometimes that
project is insane.
Yeah, they get items that just fall apart as soon as they take it out. It's just like to ceases to exist anymore. Just like, this is my time. I'm gone.
Yeah,
and that's similar like to that. Like you have to try and preserve it in this soil grabby machine.
Yeah, exactly.
The little soil grabber.
Not even a machine, it's such more like a mechanism, just kind of like if you imagine like a nutcracker and then you just make it 3 times bigger and add parts. It was very manual.
Oh, yeah, of course. Of course. Can't make it too easy for you.
Nah.
No,
people have a job to get paid for, you know? They need to do some work.
Yeah, I mean, all this technology of like how you can map the area and put it all back perfectly, but you can't have an automatic soil grabber. It's like, no. You can do that part.
Okay, but I mean, to be completely honest as well, just we made sure that we extract them exactly how we wanted to too, though, right?
Course. Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that I get that in there. Because
I'm just being silly.
Yeah, no, but I really love it. But I think it's part of me also not having been as involved in the actual excavation that I have so much respect and awe for the massive amount of work that the excavation crew, which I was a part of, but the massive amount of effort that they put in, and this project really was a labor of devotion and love. I mean, everyone really just cranked it.
Yeah. No, disclaimer, I have the utmost respect for all the people who
I know. There was nothing to you.
I know. But I do. I have the utmost respect. It's something that I couldn't do. These fucking stumpy hands could never go through and make it as be as delicate as needed. It is such an impressive thing.
That, but
it is very impressive. I'm just gonna make fun of some little things, but there is no disrespect to anybody ever. It's
of course not,
apart from every other Viking ship burial, because they all stink.
Obviously, yeah. I got the joke now. I'm on board.
You're on it. You're with it. Okay, so it's been scanned. You dug out all the rivets. You kind of know roughly what's there. So what can we, from the ship itself, because I imagine there's items in there as well that we can learn from.
A few that we could find, yeah.
But what can we learn from like the ship itself? Is there anything that that kind of changes things or improves our knowledge of what we think is there any significance to it?
Oh, definitely. I think just the fact that it exists in and of itself is very valuable, in the sense that even though it might not be like super unique, I'm saying that with an asterisk because I'll come back to that, but what it does show is that it adds more wood to a fire that we've been kind of having for a bit when it comes to interpreting how you buried people at certain points. And this adds another kind of evidence factor into, this was a tradition. and they did it that way. Because even though we talk about a bunch of ship burials and the ways people were buried in the Viking Age and the centuries beforehand, you don't necessarily have want to be mindful of exactly how I'm saying this. You have a bunch of examples, but not necessarily a bunch of big ones, and not necessarily in that region in Norway either. In that region of Norway, you have tuna.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of a kind of like a fight going on between the eastern side of the Oslo Fjord and the western side. And the western side has Oseberg and Gjellestad, who are like super well preserved. They're a bit sassy about it, and I kind of love it because my family comes from that side of the fjord. But but on the eastern side, you have tuna, which is just amazing because of the fact that it's preserved. But in comparison to Gjellestad and Oseberg, it looks like
it looks like a little rough.
It looks a bit less than. Yeah, it looks rough. It looks like it's had a rough weekend.
Yeah.
And Gjellestad adds, which is in a very like a fairly close proximity in that area ish, adds to the fact that this was a tradition that also happened here. Tuna was not one of a kind. This was something that happened several times. And there are, I think, probably many other examples that we just haven't, for whatever reason, found or haven't been preserved. And for that reason, it's valuable. Another reason it's valuable is because of the technological innovation that's happening, that we've been able to kind of reassemble or are reassembling a ship find in this way has never been done before. And I'm not just like saying any random ship, because this has probably been done with other ship types, but a burial ship from this time period has not been put back together and reconstructed in the way that it's now being done, because they didn't have the opportunity to do so in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And then it's not like we can take the Oseberg back apart and redo that. That would be silly.
Yeah.
So I'd say it's valuable for that reason. And kind of also just the fact that it's like new to us a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like, what kind of juice can we squeeze out of this orange? You know, what can we figure out?
With it being so new, I assume there is still a bunch of investigations going into all the different
From
pieces.
what I can understand, yeah. I worked the project up until 2021. So I'm not I know the people and I talk to them often, but I'm not directly involved in what's being done.
Okay. So is it kind of, does it just get taken out of the ground and then just get sent on to other teams? Or do some people stay with it the whole way through?
No. The project manager, Christian, who I mentioned earlier, he's still the project manager.
Okay.
It's just that expansive team that we had when we were excavating is not necessary anymore. And there wasn't funding to keep all of us going either, or wasn't even like necessarily that much that for us to do in that case. So now,
Now do all the different pieces just go to the museum and they start to comb through and really look at everything and try and...
Yeah, so every rivet is being x-rayed, CT scanned, and taken through an MRI as well, I think.
Wow.
Just to glean this. And there are 1,200 of those almost. There are, like shit ton.
That's insane. That's insane because the NHS complain about giving MRI scans all the time. They talk about how expensive it is. I'm like, fucking, you guys.
I actually am not sure if the MRIs are still being done, but I know for a fact that the CTs are happening to every single one because they can be mapped.
CTs as well.
Yeah. No, I know. I don't know if I think the healthcare system here has similar complaints, but
we have it all the time over here.
It's like, yay, it's multidisciplinary. You can use it for stuff that isn't sick bodies as well.
Yeah, I imagine there is I'm joking. I imagine there is a whole. I don't mean this for you. I mean for like anybody listening I imagine there is a whole difference between CT scanning a river and a human body. I've had a bunch of.
I imagine there would be. Yeah,
I've had a bunch of CT scans at one point in my life, so like I do I get it. But I said it was just a joke.
I love that this episode's just littered with it was just a joke.
Yeah,
I promise.
I know. I feel like I haven't had to put this many disclaimers in for a long time.
I'm sorry.
It's either you or that I started drinking whiskey again. So it's one of the two.
But let's hope it's the whiskey because I'd love to come back on.
Oh, you're welcome. Anybody who I can just sit and chat with is always welcome back. Okay, so they're gonna scan them. We know kind of like the shape of it, but what about for like physical things? Because I assume with it
Bubbles?
being I assume with it being a burial ship, there has to be
a burial
body. Yeah.
Well, we found very few traces of remains. We did find the remains of a horse, which we thought it was a horse when we found it, and it has been confirmed to be a horse.
Okay.
As far as I know, we did not have that many traces of a human body or human bodies in like plural. I think we found a shard of what I think is a cranium or a skull.
Okay.
Whether or not that was a primary find, meaning that it was originally there for the actual burial of the ship, I am not 100% certain, because I think I might be getting this wrong, but it was in a bit of a dodgy place where we were like, is this from something else? Or is it from the burial? But I do have a picture of the thing that I can show you.
Whose fucking skull is that then? If it's not, like who's that?
This is on a site of 15 burial mounds though, which was then plowed for like 250 years before we dug. So who knows?
I'd be like, there's a bit of skull here, but it's not where it should be. But okay, I guess it could be from the plowing, because I imagine that's kind of what would happen. Is why you don't have remains is because the plowing has come through and kind of the farmers. If you've only got the bottom part, I imagine the bodies would be on the deck. Do they? They don't have decks, right?
No, they would, but they could be removed.
Oh, okay.
So funny thing. I might be getting a call from Christian about this later if I get this wrong. But anyway, I will tell you what I told you when I was at the site doing tours. From what we understood then.
I can always remove bits before it goes out to public, so don't worry.
It's just good for me to put my head out a bit and assume stuff. But essentially, so it was the bottom part that we found, right? And technically speaking, if the deck was assembled when the ship was put in place, theoretically, the deck would have been above where we would expect it to kind of have any traces of anything. However, from what we could tell, it seems that at some point the mound, like the weight of the mound, pushed down with such force that it seems that the deck shattered at one point and things fell into the bottom of the ship. From what we can tell, seems that way. And the funny good thing for us in that part meant that there was stuff in the bottom of the ship.
Yeah.
Not as much as we'd hoped, but the deck that we assumed would be long gone. I can't remember if we found actual traces of ship planks from the deck, but there were traces of the chamber that would have been built on top of the deck or into the deck. From
other burial sites, do we know that the bodies be put on the deck? Is that like a common thing, or would they be put, like, if the deck wasn't in there, would they be put underneath?
So from
if there is a custom to that at all, if there is like a
I think the only two that we have that are preserved enough to give kind of a straightforward-ish answer to that is the Gokstad and the Osberg, where the actual construction of a house was still in place.
Well, that's what I was thinking,
Yeah, and it seems that the tradition then was to put the bodies inside that little house, so like a tent-shaped house.
Which would that be on? So that would be on the deck.
That was the assumption, but I read an article recently, which I think was from 2015 or 2018, of someone who had gone through the Oseberg specifically, and also the Gokstad, I think, and he'd looked at it and looked at the way it was assembled, and he'd actually come to the conclusion that the deck was mounted, but then floorboards were taken away to make space for the house. So the wooden tent, I guess you could call it, was essentially built into the ship.
Oh, okay.
Which I guess could potentially explain, if that was the case at Gjellestad, it would also explain why we found traces of the walls of the chamber. Either the deck collapsed and the construction, like the house, fell into the ship, or it was actually built into it as part of, I would guess, as part of the burial, because I don't think it would be that kind of seaworthy with that construction on it. I think the weight displacement would be kind of weird.
I imagine they would put that little house tent thing to also, I guess it makes it a little bit easier to make the mound as well.
Could potentially, yeah.
You need a shitload less dirt.
Yeah. That's the question also had, like, where did that dirt come from? Like, did they just grab it from the surrounding field? Like, where the hell did all of that earth come from? Like,
to see like a big crater somewhere.
We're talking several tons of just straight up dirt. Like, where did it come from?
Yeah, and also if they, because am I right in thinking that some were left open so you could kind of visit after for a little? Is that like a theory that maybe I don't know if that's the same with the ships, but with some, obviously some were left open so you could kind of go and visit. And I imagine like that little, if that was the case, that little house thing would add some stability to that being a possibility.
I think so. No, there's definitely credibility to that theory. I think that theory, from what I can understand, it has grounds in both stories and sagas, from what I know, but also an analysis done in the early 2000s with samples from the Oseberg Mound, where on the back end of the ship, so behind where that house would be, essentially, there was a bucket that was found that contained apples that only grow in the fall, so autumn apples. Okay. But traces from the front part of the ship showed spring flower seeds, which indicated that perhaps that part of the mound hadn't been put in place until months afterwards. So like you said, the ship may have been open for visitors or whatever for a certain amount of time before it was closed completely. That might definitely be the case with Gjellestad, but I have no conclusive evidence that I know of that I could say that for certain. But if it was the case with Oseberg, why wouldn't it be the case with Gjellestad?
Yeah, it would.
Either it was a one-time thing or was a tradition, who knows? But I don't want to close the door on it at all.
No.
Could very well be the case.
Because
Watch me now, like, after this episode drops, get a call from my previous boss going like, oh my God, there's nothing that indicates that. No. Psh. It's fun to speculate.
Yeah, but it is though. It absolutely is.
It's the best part of my job, to be honest.
Does that ever frustrate you as like because publicly you have to be careful of what you can speculate, I guess, because people can take it too serious, maybe?
100%. But at the same time,
except on this podcast where you can just speculate.
Yes,
you say whatever you want. Whatever you want. I'm not going to hold you to it.
Thanks, man. No, well, I found after working with dissemination and talking, like my job being talking to people about archaeological stuff, that tiptoeing that line with speculation for me is actually one of the most fun things that I do. But it is sort of like in a certain sense, with great power comes great responsibility type thing, where
quoting the mighty Uncle Ben.
Yeah, sure. Casually throwing a Spider-Man reference in there. But what I mean by that is that with me being an archaeologist, there is a certain level of weight that is lent to speculations that come from someone with my profession.
Yeah, of course.
So what I find really fun is speculating in the context of it actually possibly having, like, of it making sense in a way of, not in an Ancient Aliens way, but in a way of kind of, well, there is a speculation with Osberg where there is evidence that suggests it. We can't say it with 100% certainty, but it is likely. And then drawing on that, then you can, if you start to speculate on that type of stuff, that's what I find really, really fun. And in the case of Gjellestad, you can have a field day with those sort of speculations. But the fun part of those speculations for me is the basis in, I wouldn't say hard facts, but in certain kind of core elements. Like, for example, the fact that we can speculate whether or not the ship had a mast, because that was one of the things that we really tried to investigate, because we couldn't find any traces of a mast on any of the images or anything. So, like, but did this ship then sail? Or was it a rowing ship? From the ish dating that we've got of it, which is places in the early Viking Age, indicates that it probably would have had a mast, because the other, both from Denmark and from Norway, kind of preserved elements that we have indicates that it would have a mast. But the more we, like, the further down we got, and like, there's no physical evidence that there was a mast there at the time of the burial.
Yeah.
But that then becomes fun ground for speculation, because that doesn't necessarily eliminate the possibility of there having been a mast there at some point. Maybe it was detachable. Maybe it was taken away when the burial was taking place. Maybe it didn't have a mast. And then what does that indicate? Does that indicate that this was right before they started putting masts on ships in Scandinavia? Or does it indicate that this ship was not intended for sailing? Maybe because paying for a sail was too big of an expense, or maybe a different reason where it was an element of status to have a certain sized crew, because if you don't have a sail, you need more people to row your boat.
Okay.
Literally.
Okay. Yeah. It's a power move.
Yeah. Could
not
be.
having a sail, like, to get more people.
Yeah.
I mean, like, yeah, it could be. People never cease to amaze me. So anything could be possible.
Yeah.
And it's clear that, I was going to say this before as well. These must have been important people, because you're not.
I think so. This was not an everyday.
Yeah, you're not doing this for everybody. You're not getting a ship and just the work that goes into burying it, and the items that they put with them, the animals that they put with them.
Just
somebody of high importance. And then that would, again, I feel anyway, would lean itself to these being open for people to come and visit. Just, I feel like,
maybe
me anyway, like, that would be no different to the relics of St. Cuthbert being in Durham Cathedral. It's a very similar thing for, like, in Christianity. Like, the relics of many different pious people are kind of dotted around different cathedrals and abbeys, and people still today go and take a pilgrimage there to visit these relics
to
and
pay their respects and see them and experience them.
I feel like that's no different to what this could have been. And maybe it was open for like a small, short period of time. Maybe it was open for longer. I guess maybe if it was open for longer, you would know a little bit more evidence.
I would assume so, but at the same time, I mean, that's the thing. It on one hand, it is a snapshot of something that very concrete that happened at some point, but at the same time, the snapshot isn't necessarily all that clear. So some of the details can be a bit hard to make out. And also, especially like in European settings, Northern European settings, especially, for us today, burials are very like short, clear cut thing. But who knows how long this burial took? Who knows what time period we're talking here? Maybe it took time for people to get from other places to be a part of the burial. Maybe part of it could take weeks, months. And there are sagas indicating that could be the case. There's evidence pointing to that. Neil Price, a professor at the University of, I think it's at Uppsala, has a very fun theory about the burial being somewhat akin to what we would call a play, where the burial in and of itself was a performance of some sort, or was something that was happening, and it had set elements, and it took place over much longer than we probably with our contemporary expectations would just kind of assume.
But I think even if if you take the macabre away from like modern burials, there's still a kind of theater to them.
No, absolutely.
We have
you're supposed to wear black.
Yeah,
you're supposed to be sad,
and you have like the for the most part you have like the coffin being carried in this kind of very not extravagant, but like in this display, and you have somebody who usually reads the eulogy, and you'll have maybe like a poem, you'll have songs.
But it absolutely is. That's great. Yeah.
Religious ones would have prayer. So it's still this spectacle.
We just don't think of it that way.
It still is a bit of a spectacle, even though we're usually very sad, and we put I think that's like a more of a modern perspective or a modern look at death, that we are very negative around death and we're very sad around it. But I don't think that's certainly not the case for all cultures, and certainly wouldn't have been the case throughout history as well. It kind of been, and certainly some like celebrated as moving on to another world, as going to somewhere else. And it would make sense. Like people would come from all around. And I guess it would take, if it was a particularly important person, you can't just jump in your car and drive there like we could today.
Make sure you get there in time.
Yeah, people have to travel. So it would make sense that it would be drawn out. And they have to get all that fucking soil, wherever they get that from.
Mm-hmm.
Someone's going to go collect that.
Yeah. Oh, that would be a shit job. Man, just like dragging heap tons of soil. I hope to the people who constructed that mound way back when that they didn't have to go that far. I hope it was from the surrounding fields, because that sounds like
I'm sure it will be. I'm sure like they will have had a nice amount of soil from the ditch that they dug to put the ship in.
No, but it genuinely is an interesting question, because we genuinely don't necessarily know. Like, it's been assumed that it's just from the surrounding area, but if you want to squint at it and really look into the details, we don't actually necessarily know if that's the case. And in the case of Gjellestad, something that I didn't mention was that there were also these very interesting, I guess, like it took us a while to realize what they were, like patches of peat, like from a bog, that had been put in layers on the mound, that we found in the ship, which was one of the reasons why we came to the preliminary suspicion that the deck had caved in, because we found these peat, like, or what was left, like traces of these peat bricks, I guess you could call them, in the ship, and also like surrounding it a tiny bit. So almost like they put, I mean, it's almost like what do you call it? Like a bed coverlet that's been made with a bunch of different patches, right?
Okay.
So one of the archaeologists that have been looking into that helped us a bunch, Rebecca Cannell, with the scientific analyses. She had this really great quote in the National Geographic article where she said it must have looked really beautiful with all these colors, this patchwork of colors, of like browns and greens and hues of orange, and I think that I'm digressing here a bit, but that's something that I find really exciting to be reminded about too, how sometimes we forget the senses a bit, where we look at this old brown thing or whatever, and we forget about what did it look like in different lighting, and what color did it have, and what did it smell like, and how was the experience, because those details are very often lost to us.
Absolutely. I can't remember whether this was on a Q&A episode or one of the main episodes. I recently went to Durham Cathedral, which is the only reason I knew that St. Cuthbert was there. No, he's not.
You knew more than me.
I knew that he was there. That's one of the reasons why I went. But they make a kind of an observation that inside the cathedral originally would have been painted. So we go in there and it's all just stone. And I think he said it was like when the Protestants came, they scrubbed the walls clean of all this like lovely paint because it was too extravagant for their branch of Christianity. But they repainted like a small section, and it's in no way like 100% accurate. It's just like, this is what it could have looked like. And we kind of forget that extra level to these things because we just look at it as like this, it's just stone, and you kind of forget that maybe there were all these details painted on it. And that's kind of similar, I guess. You forget that it's this nice big 3D thing, and it could be like the paint.
Very few people think about the fact that the Roman statues that we look at and glorify and everything, that they were painted probably in somewhat of what we would consider today a bit gaudy.
I'm gonna nod like I knew that they were painted. I had no idea.
They were. And this is just we've just forget about that sometimes. And the thing is, I think that it's been known about for quite a while, but I learned about it fairly recently, just a few years ago. And then whenever I find myself at a museum and I see one of those statues, like I have to remind myself, like, oh yeah, right, they were painted because they found paint traces. And I think there was the National Museum. No, it was Glyptoteket in Copenhagen. That's actually done an exhibit featuring like examples of how they imagine things could have been painted. And then they've also leaned heavily into at least one of the ones that worked there that I was fortunate enough to have a short conversation with, where they've leaned into the hues of the skin tones. Why were they white?
Okay.
Like because some of the recreations that have been done have been with very pale shades of skin. Awesome. And then it's just tradition, I guess, at this point. But and then one of the people who worked there was like, but why did you find that hue on there? And then they started playing around with this idea of like, we need to make sure we're careful here, especially if the hair of the statue is very obviously not necessarily Eurocentric hair, but has much more of like a tight, I guess you could call like a 4C type curl. Why on earth is the default skin color so pale?
We all know
we all know the answer. Let's just leave it there.
I'm not fucking touching this with a barge pole. So
no, but my point is just like that 3D experience, we tend to forget it.
No, absolutely we do. And unfortunately, I think you raised a good point. I was thinking when you were saying that, how it's probably one of those situations again with academia where it's like, they were painted, but nobody can really stick their neck out and say this is exactly how they were painted. So then probably nobody really wants to touch it because it's like, it's never going to be accurate, so nobody really wants to do it.
Yeah, and it becomes very contentious very quick. And I think somewhat related to what we were talking about way earlier when it comes to not necessarily putting out fires, but changing a narrative that Roman statues like these, we're way off topic now, but it does circle back to Gjellestad in a way where dissimilarly from Gjellestad, which is very, very fresh and very new, although it does very nicely line up with the tradition and the type of find that we've been excited about for a few hundred years now. Roman statues have been part of kind of the public perception of the past for millennia, right? And you have the whole Renaissance and everything where it's just like, oh, ancient Greece and Rome, and wow, that was the shit, man. So I think in addition to it just being super contentious, and I completely understand, although it's disappointing that people don't necessarily want to touch it, it's also really hard to change that narrative, right? It's really, really hard to change something that's so cemented. And the way that circles back to Gjellestad is also kind of coming back to how like the very candid discussions we had about how we wanted to phrase things when we told people about it, because the immediate reaction that we got before the excavation even started was, which king? Which king's buried there? Where is the king? Where is the, and here's the thing, that's not necessarily
to say, like the most significant ship burial we have is a female, but everyone goes, which king?
It's just also randomly what I'm currently writing my PhD about.
It's like I knew.
Just plugging that just slowly, carefully. No, but
plug anything you want. You can. No one's gonna stop you here. Plug away.
Yeah, but actually, I remember that I don't think I ever properly introduced myself, but I guess you can factor that in later. But
yeah, all people can just hear it now.
Yeah, we can. But I just wanted to make sure that I don't forget that point. Is that asking what king it was, because it becomes very quickly like a bit of a convoluted thing, because the thing that makes it to me both fascinating but also very hard to work with in a way is that isn't necessarily a bad like interpretation. It isn't necessarily incorrect that there's a king there. Mm-hmm. But why is that the assumption with no other kind of multiple choice options? It's kind of a from my perspective, sometimes a de facto type of assumption with no other alternatives.
Yeah, people kind of go for what they would think is like the most amazing thing.
Yeah, and I don't think they could definitely 100% have been a king or a queen for that matter, regardless of biological sex or social gender. But also because of the fact that we haven't actually been able to ID any of the people in any of the burial mounds that we've been able to find containing ships, to my knowledge anyway, I might be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure I'm not, is that we can't actually, and I know that there are archaeologists that disagree with this, but I find it also funny being kind of a little bit of a snot about it, is that there isn't necessarily anything telling us hands down that it must have been a regent, that it must have been a king or a queen. And I'm not saying that to negate the possibility, because I absolutely think it is a very high likelihood of that being the case. But since we don't have any kind of evidence saying it almost like head on, why couldn't it have been anyone else with a very big social standing? Because that's the thing. We know that there were people who were buried in these types of burials because of the fact that there are so few of them and they're so extravagant and kind of outrageous when we do find them, is that
they're fabulous.
The likelihood
they are just like,
yeah, like this, that is the conclusion that we can come to, is that this person was pretty much, probably 100% certain, a person of some sort of very high social standing, because not everyone got that type of burial. And if not everyone got that type of burial, then the reasonable conclusion must be that they somehow had earned it based on something they did or a social standing that they had. Or
I love these little rabbit holes, because then that makes me think, like, I wonder if there's like a tick box that you have to meet to get the
me too
Viking burial. Because I'm like, I want it. Whatever I have to do to get that little blue check mark to say I'm going to the Viking burial, that's what I want. I'm doing that.
And then you can throw even more petrol on the fire and be like, but did it have to be that specific person or the specific time or the specific act? Because we do have burial mounds that don't contain ships or people.
So do they what's in there?
Sometimes nothing. Sometimes
but could that be because
the remains of a house?
It maybe, or
there have been burial. I should have had plenty of examples now to give you, but I know that there have been burial mounds that have been opened where there hasn't really been a trace of anything.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to my...
But then I call them burial mounds, so that in and of itself then becomes kind of mounds, constructed mounds.
I'm going to go back to my Durham trip here.
Yeah, do it.
Pull into my wealth of knowledge. Pretend I know what I'm talking about. Okay, so that just got me thinking, because St. Cuthbert was originally buried at Lindisfarne, and that's where he was housed. And then when the Vikings raided Lindisfarne...
Oh no! Did they? I hadn't heard.
I never heard of that. Okay, little history lesson.
793 was it?
Yeah, a little history lesson for you. Yeah. So when they raided Lindisfarne, obviously they scooped up their most important prized possession, which was St. Cuthbert. It was like, maybe they took gold and silver as well, but like it was the relic of the of the March of the
That thing
Saint.
that looks important. Let's grab it.
Yeah, it was like the saint. They took the saint
Yeah.
with them because he's like, this is so important to us. So let's move him somewhere safe from this place. Is getting sacked, and we're going to take him to. I think he went somewhere else and then ended up at Durham. But then that could be maybe a similar. See, if we're sat here speculating, maybe it
Absolutely
could be that it's that you have one of these burial mounds that is a family relative who's someone who's very close, and then your area gets attacked, and
let's move it.
You lose the land, so you're like, shit. I need to take Grandpa with me because I don't want him being buried on this shitty land.
No,
but I guess it's the same thing that we probably all have it, and to lesser.
It's like, what's the first 3 things you'd grab if you had to leave the house in a fire kind of situation?
Yeah. It can, but it is, and to a lesser extent because we don't really bury people on our own land anymore. Like no, but like Rocco, I had my beautiful little dog. When he goes, I want to bury him somewhere like that's meaningful to me. But I might bury him at my house. But then maybe something happens and I can't live at my house anymore. But there's a very, very
special
fucking
thing,
important part of my life that's in the garden. It's like, so what do? Do I dig him up and take him with me, or do I leave him there and have the memory? And I guess that's kind of the only thing I can really equate to it in my life is what it would be. And it's like, but it would be a similar thing. Like if you had this person buried, like, do you take them? Do you leave them?
Yeah. Or is it a case of, oh man, there are my head is flying like 15 different ways because there are just so many ways you can attack this. Because there's also like, there's also the question of what does the construction of a mound represent? Are there, kind of like we were talking about with like burials having set procedures and stuff back then probably, and also today. But we were on the subject of mounds, and what I was saying, I think right before we paused for a bit was, well,
I promise you weren't going to forget.
No, I didn't. I was just, as usual, just kind of working out exactly how I want to say it. I have ADHD, so I always have like 21 thoughts going at once in my head. So I'm always trying to like pick one and solidify it.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. But what I was saying was that mounds were, without a shadow of a doubt, used for burial purposes, right? But then you have the case with the mounds that have not necessarily anything in them, or maybe they have the remains of the construction of a longhouse. There are a couple of those. And then the question becomes, on one hand, why was a mound built? What was the significance of it? Was it, like, don't get me wrong, just for a burial, or did it have other types of purposes? And what were the requirements for a mound? Like, what did it have to contain anything specific, or could it be like did it have like a plethora of different options? Like it's very common to have a gray or black car, but you can buy a yellow one. It's not normal, but you can.
Did you say everybody without a yellow car isn't normal?
Well, I mean, it's fun to be a bit different, though, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I guess I would say it's not usual. Normal is a stupid word, but it's not what you usually see. So there are plenty of researchers that I know about and that I probably also don't know about who have studied this. But the fun part of me for speculating is exactly kind of in the same sense of where did the dirt come from, the dirt for the mound. It is fun in the way that suddenly there are so many opportunities in a way to kind of reassess our knowledge of the past, where we think that, oh, mound must indicate a human burial. But does it though? And then if it doesn't, what does that imply about the way people thought back then and the way that they viewed the world and interacted with the world?
I love where this is going. I love where this, especially now I've got more whiskey. I'm like, this is going. Okay, first, like 56 disclaimer of the night. Anybody with yellow cars, you're not weird. You have a yellow car. Rock
I
on
love
you.
it. Yes. Please keep buying them, because then I get to punch my sister in her shoulder and she gets upset about it. Now, let's be honest, she's usually the one that gets to punch me in the shoulder first, but at the same time, it's fun.
The little yellow car game.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's a fascinating idea of, because see, little me just kind of always thought of a burial mound as having like a person,
because that's how we talk about it.
And
usually they do. And even if the person's gone, or disintegrated or whatever, there are indications that there was once a person or several people here.
Okay, I've got so many questions.
Yeah.
Do you think is there any evidence? You're probably not the person who can answer this either, but is there ever any evidence of like a pet or an animal only burial mound?
Oh yeah, several.
Oh, there is.
I say we as a collective we of like all the archaeologists ever globally.
Of course.
But I know in Scandinavia, again, I don't have the names on hand for the sites, but there are cases of mounds that have been I think there's one with only horses and one with only dogs. And there's one with, I think, a collection of different animals. Now, horses and dogs tend to appear.
But
and
the fact that it's
or cattle.
The fact that it's multiple makes me think that it's maybe not what I'm thinking though. Because surely if it's like multiple,
for like a pet,
yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So if it's multiple, that would I would assume that's maybe like some sort of ritual type thing, maybe or like some other significance. But unless some fucker was just like, oh, my dog's died, so all his best friends are going with it, and he's just like taking all all the other pets. Is like, you need your little buddies in the afterlife, so come on.
I mean, it's very stereotypically Viking though, isn't it? Like you'd assume that a Viking could do that, but from our understanding of them anyway. But I might be wrong about this, but as far as I can remember, I think it's from Sweden. I think there is one case of a single horse. I think, big disclaimer there. Okay. But the thing is, but here's the thing with academia and what we know as well, right? Which is one of the reasons why I love this podcast so much, because we get to come on here and talk about this kind of stuff, is that there are so many things that we know that has been hard to get into the public eye, both because it's hard to get the attention, but also because academia is not necessarily accessible. Sometimes it's behind a paywall, and sometimes the way it's written doesn't translate in a way that you understand the significance of it. And there's just heaps and heaps of it, regardless of whichever discipline you're talking about. So my point there being that yes, there are absolutely cases of that. I don't have the number on hand, and from what I can remember, they're not that common in the sense that there haven't been found that many, but there are cases.
It would make complete sense to me, because I think whilst to me as well, our opinions 100%. Towards animals have changed in modern times. Like we've probably softened, or most people have lost that connection of like where say meat comes from. For most people, like it's in the little cellophane wrapper in the supermarket, and they lose that detachment that this was once an animal. Yeah. Like I think for most people that's
living,
kind of
breathing thing. Yeah,
that's disappeared. But on the flip side of that, we've also become a lot closer to our pets, our domesticated animals. We've become very attached to, and I think that's a human nature, and maybe it wouldn't be in the same way as like Rocco here, like comes and gives me loads of cuddles and kisses, and like we're little best friends and we roam around. But 1,000 years ago, you would have somebody who was particularly with a horse. It's like, this is a fucking great horse. This horse has never done me wrong. Like we've ridden thousands of miles together. We've been in wars together, and it's such a humanizing factor that you would have that attachment and that love to an animal that we maybe sometimes forget when we're talking about like historical figures, because we just look at them as like, oh, he's just this dude that lived, or dudette, this lady that lived like 1,000 years ago, and it's like you just have this figure, and you kind of forget to have that emotion and that just that they're human and they loved and cared for things the same we do. So if you had this
100%,
if you had this amazing animal, this amazing pet,
this fucking horse deserves his own mound. Let's be honest.
I would, and particularly then maybe your everyday farmer wouldn't be able to do it. But if you had if you have like
a bit of like an eccentric Nero type dude with a bunch of cash to spend in
That's
the
it. Then
Viking
you
Age.
get the person in the right position, the
Yeah.
Jarl, the king, the wealthy landowner who has the disposable income, who also loves his animal. Like it would
Mhm.
make sense. You would be like, this horse
And
deserves. It
yeah,
maybe
and
doesn't
it's
get a ship, but it can have a little burial mound.
yeah, and a culture is made up of individuals, right? And then you have cultural patterns, or societies, I guess is a better term for it. But then the fact that a society is made up of individuals means that every society has quirky individuals
Right.
who does
This
things slightly differently.
people
Or
forget this. It's like, and I
Mhm.
find this so frustrating when people are like, "Oh, Viking hairstyles with this," or like, I don't know, like just anything that's like a personal feature. Even when it comes down to like items of clothing,
Mhm.
because obviously we have so little finds, and people are like, "Oh, they must have all wore this." And it's like, no, people are fucking individuals, and people do things to different quality levels. Like some people will go the absolute most and make something amazing, but there are some lazy fuckers out there. I don't care whether it's now or whether it's 1,000 years ago. Some people are gonna not gonna do it as well, and it's just not gonna look as good.
Mhm.
Or some people are gonna want to put their own individual spin on it by adding a little flourish here and
Mhm.
there, whether it's to their head,
100%.
to their clothes, to their animal. So it's so frustrating when you people just try and put this monochrome thing to like
Yeah.
these
Oh,
people
I
all did this.
100% agree. Yeah. But I think that's also so interesting because we tend to forget that too, I think, because sometimes traces of that individualism, if you will, I mean, that is a very Western concept in and of itself, but traces of that individualism can be hard to find, you know? So very commonly then it does get lumped into, oh, everyone did this or did that. And I love kind of taking a step back and looking at whatever I'm working with at the time and being a bit like, but why not though? Like, but why? What if this specific thing that I'm looking at is a result of someone going, never tried that before, or this looks a bit funky,
Right, because
or
people did that though. Like people
yeah,
will have done that, and that's how innovation happens as well.
100%.
That's how it happens. And the same with like, I think I've said this a bunch of times, like even just down to like prehistoric people with eating berries. Some fucker had to eat that fucking berry first, and they got sick. And then the next,
I want to go back to time travel just to be able to see like that one dude who was like,
yeah,
pick that berry or dudette.
and
And
you know someone else
everyone
came
else
along.
was like, what are you doing? It's like, we don't know though, do we? And then they go ahead and die or get blisters or whatever.
You know, the one that I find the most fascinating is not like the berry, it's when we've learned that if you cook something to a certain point that is poisonous,
Yeah.
it now becomes not poisonous. Say like kidney beans. You can't eat kidney
Yep.
beans raw, but if you cook them
Nope.
to a certain temperature, now you can eat them. It's
Yeah.
like, who the fuck learned that? At what point did somebody go, okay, I can't eat these right now, but I'm going to cook them and then I'm going to see if they work? Like,
Yeah.
and how many people had to die just in that one process?
We thank you for your service.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I love a good chili. But
Yeah.
like, it's like how many people had to like be sacrificed just because I bet it's more than one. A few just
Oh,
to get there, it had
definitely.
to be a few. But it's just like it is that we are individuals, and I don't think we've just suddenly become individuals in the 21st century. We've
No, I
always
think that's a bit of and most commonly in my experience, very unconscious, but still a bit of an arrogant way to look at the past because we do have a very kind of evolutionistic way of looking at the past, in my opinion, sometimes where it's like, oh, well, they didn't know any better, or oh, well, we're so evolved now, or whatever. And that fascinates me. Like, for example, circling back to Gjellestad, where we look at this complex, and even though we don't necessarily have that much physical stuff left, it's just a huge amount of effort put into place with all these individuals with who lived all their different lives. We don't know who they were. We don't know how many there were. We don't know how long, like why they did exactly what they did and in what manner and exactly how long time it took. But everything was like everything was made up of individuals who lived all their lives and had all these different aspects to them. And then sometimes we find faint traces of that. And I think, to me at least, that's what makes my job so fascinating. It's like having these faint ghosts of all these individuals of the past who had all these different lives and thoughts and way of looking at the world that is just completely different to what anything I could imagine. It's just really fascinating.
That's one of my favorite parts about history, when you can find the human aspect to it, and you can really get into someone's mind. And I recently had Richard Wakeman on, and he spoke about Richard he works at the British Museum, and he looks after like different collections, and like puts bits together, and he's just a fascinating person. Like, which one of the best people you can follow on Instagram, in my opinion, if you like history. Like, he just takes pictures of all the different artifacts he comes across on a daily basis. He'll like take pictures of them and like put a little bit of explanation about it. And obviously the British Museum has millions of very cool artifacts.
They would have,
yeah. But he says his favorite thing, or one of his absolute favorite pieces in there, are these tiny little, I guess maybe not, I don't know if they're paper, like little writings from the Roman Empire. I think they come from like in Britain, but they're from the Roman Empire, and it's just people being like, the weather's shit here. And it's like he says like they're so unassuming that when I went to visit them, he made sure like he took us to see them. He was like, you have to see these. But most people walk past them because I think it's like between Sutton Hoo helmet and maybe like the Egyptian period. So people just like walk straight past
without having any idea.
Yeah. And it's a little piece of paper, but they're just there's so much character and human element in them, of just like slagging off the British weather, or like somebody maybe writing a love letter if they're missing their spouse. And it's just such a beautiful piece of history that you can capture 100%. Like the mindset. And
I love that so much. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but
no, go you.
No, I love that. I love like those little traces. Like there's a runic inscription from the pier in Bergen, which says something along the lines of, I think it's something like, sit down, write this, fart, stand up and walk away, or something. Okay. And I'm like, that is random as hell, but why not? Right. And then I think there's another one that says, you need to hurry up. Ragnhild says you should go home. And it's like these little traces of the individual. And I think I don't know if this has been published yet, but it is fairly common knowledge now that when they were, I used to work as a guide at the Viking Ship Museum here in Oslo before it closed for it's being renovated right now and being extended. And during one of the periods where they very carefully sometimes vacuum the ships, like with a lift and everything, because it can't handle that much weight. And during one of those sessions, one of the guys who was involved in it kind of pulled me over after I'd done a tour, and he was like, have they told you about the game board on the Gokstad? And I was like, what are you talking about? And essentially, like in the prow of the ship, all the way at the front, there's this little wooden part sticking out where you could essentially like take a step up and look out across. Kate Winslet. While they were, Kate
Winslet.
Yeah, pretty much Kate Winslet. Yeah. And when they've been vacuumed at that time, again, I wish I had a picture to show you, but they found etchings on that little piece of wood, that step, if you will, that indicated that at some point someone, I assume, had been bored as hell and were like, we need to do something. And then they like etched, like carved in a little like board piece. I hesitate to say chess because it wasn't chess, but like something like Nefatafel or something like that. I guess for entertainment, that a couple of people, maybe more, could sit there and actually just like play while they were hanging out on the ship.
They would. Like,
why wouldn't they?
Of course they would. Like, I was in a car for an hour the other day with 3 of my friends, and we're like making up crazy games to pass the time.
Exactly. Exactly.
So it just makes complete sense if you're just sat on this ship for a few days, or longer, just be like, we're gonna.
Oh, look, there's the sky, and there's more sky, and there's water.
There's the water, yeah, and you're gonna make up tales. You're gonna make each other laugh. You have to do these things
to pass the time, and those are like those fine traces of like the people, right? Even though there aren't that many things left necessarily, we do have a few traces of stuff like that. Like I failed to mention earlier, but there are traces of at least 2 different instances where people have, after the mound was constructed and closed, have dug their way into the mound twice.
Of the Gjellestad one?
Yeah.
How can you tell that?
We essentially saw, so if someone digs their way into a mound, the soil pattern changes. So it kind of similarly to how I kind of described like the dirt earlier, like there is a discoloration, and if that discoloration continues in a way, and we're able to follow it, it indicates a tunnel. And then it's like, what size is it? How deep is it? Like, what's happening here? And we found 2 instances of those at Gjellestad. One is likely from within the Viking Age, and one is fairly recent, which we think probably is. We have no way to say this for certain, but we think it's probably in connection to when the mound was plowed away in the 1800s.
Okay, so maybe they went in and had a look.
Yeah, I mean, I would have. Yeah, I don't know if it was like. It's like, what is this? Like, this is so, and I think there was one, I think that was in connection to the most recent one from the what we assume is the 1800s, where we could actually see that a shovel or an axe or something had hit one of the planks and like cracked it open in the side of the ship, because we saw how like the shape of the tunnel, and then we could follow actually traces of the planks or the strakes, if you're being specific about terminology of like the I mean shiplap of the ship going upwards. And even though the planks themselves were mostly disintegrated, the disintegrated wood was clear enough for us to sometimes actually see the lines in a few cases. And in one of those cases, it was just gone. There was just like this gap.
Yeah.
And jagged edges. And it was like, what? Well, that is a snapshot if I ever saw any.
But that spirals back to what we were saying earlier about like how you have this perfect thing and then it becomes something else. That's again in that moment, it's like, yeah, we could have this cool piece of wood, but we got this other awesome thing of like this person
that tells us something completely different that we wouldn't have learned otherwise.
This person who was digging and just fucking hit this thing, and it's just like,
and just went, you know what? Fuck it. I'm making my way in here. Crank it. Like,
yeah, this other cool.
Rip it away.
Yeah, this other cool thing that happens, and it's fun.
Yeah.
I guess the original one would be grave robbing, I assume. I imagine that was
something akin to the terminology for it is haugbrot, which is a Norse word that literally translated means breaking the mound. And there's a professor at the museum where I work called Jan Bill, who's proposed a very interesting theory. It can be a bit, I like it. I'm not totally convinced by it, but I like it. Where there, from Oseberg and Gokstad especially, there are very clear traces of someone making their way into the mound and having their way with it, if you will. I'm a bit hesitant with grave robbing, just because, not because it's necessarily wrong, but because it unconsciously communicates some sort of profit. And we don't know if that was the motive behind it, but someone made their way into the mound. And in the case of Oseberg and Gokstad, which is why I mentioned them specifically, is that these people were like really kind and left their wooden shovels behind.
Okay.
In the tunnels, which means that we could date them and figure out when they were from.
Okay,
And they
so
were
did they make
yeah.
did they make the way all the way in?
Oh yeah,
Or,
into the burial chambers.
I say what they found was much more important than taking their shovels with them.
Pretty much. I mean, it's like, why? But we have tons of shovels, I guess. Why, like, screw it.
Yeah, maybe.
Might as well just leave them.
Although, unless it's like that trowel.
Yeah, unless someone's like, God damn it, I left my shovel in there.
It's like I've got all this gold, but my fucking shovel.
Mm-hmm.
It's my
That's
shovel.
gotta be annoying. Yeah. But both sets of shovels were dated to the mid 900s. Osberg is from the early 800s, and Gokstad is from the early 900s. So approximately like about 100 years between those two. But the break-ins, I guess, happened at the same time, essentially, from what we can tell with the shovels. And interestingly, there are quite a few sources that cite that the what would now be the Danish king Harald Bluetooth, which is where Bluetooth, the term, comes from. You probably already knew that, but I just thought I'd throw it in there just in case.
That's the first time I've ever heard that.
Really?
No.
No. I had to make sure. Oh, you got me there, man.
Yes.
Good thing. I'm happy. I'm like, why wouldn't he know that? But anyway, that at that point in time and during the 900s, he had his mind set on the Viken area so essentially the coastal area of the Oslo fjord. And that he wanted to grab that and make that his. So Jan Bill postulates that this could potentially be a sign of that happening. And these types of break-ins would probably require quite a few people and would probably happen in broad daylight. So this would be probably something that people would have known about. And then that his theory then is that this was a way of kind of showing who was now in charge or wanted to be in charge by literally entering the burials of previously very high standing important individuals and grabbing whatever. I mean, I wish I had an index of whatever the graves contained because we have no idea what was taken out of there, but taking likely then important items to solidify.
It wouldn't be the first time in history, like the desecration of a past ruler is then like a power move of like,
it's very by the book.
Yeah, this is my land now. So fuck you in your grave. Like it's just one of the things that unfortunately does happen. But again, it goes back to what we were saying earlier, like not everything is created equal. Like possibly that may have happened, but also people probably just like a lone person or like his accomplice was like, let's just go rob a
see what we can find. Yeah,
because it's just, again, it's humans are humans and they're going to do human things. And you guarantee that you may have, even if the most respected person who the burial mound is for, you guarantee that somebody there is thinking, this guy's a twat, I don't like him. Like somebody who's going to be thinking that it's just how life works. You can't please everybody. And also there's going to be somebody that, like, most thieves are opportunistic. And if they see like this extravagant ship, or not even a ship, it's a general burial that has weaponry put in it, it has cool jewels stuff. It has a lot of like valuable things placed in there, you guarantee if you have enough people there, one person there is going, oh well, I'm coming back at nighttime and I'm taking all this cool shit, I'm filling the hole back up. No one's gonna know that it's not in there. It's a victimless crime. Like they don't know.
It is. And
they're like, they don't know.
It comes back to the why not, right? And also this again is like the assumption where we assume that if someone made their way into a burial that it had some sort of negative association or something. But then the interesting thing, I think, which I was made aware of after having worked at the Viking Ship Museum for a few years, was this interesting case of, for example, in the saga of Saint Olaf, which is like the patron saint of Norway, essentially. And I mean, if you want to be technical about it, probably all of this is propaganda, but that doesn't matter because it harkens to societal expectations and things that would legitimize power. And in the saga of Saint Olaf, there is this part, quite brief part, where it's talking about when his mom gave birth to him, and she just couldn't get him out. He just couldn't get him out. And then what the dad does is that he makes his way into the burial mound of the grandpa, and he extracts a belt from the grandpa's burial. And then when that belt is placed across the womb, or not the womb, but like the stomach of the mom trying to give birth, then she's finally able to give birth to him.
Why? This is so fucked up. But why did I just have the image of, when you have... I'm
really excited to hear about this now.
Okay, this is definitely the whiskey. When you have toothpaste and you finish the tube and you like roll it up from the bottom? Why did I just have that image of like the belt just like squeezing? I mean,
it's kind of fitting though, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. That's probably fitting, what happened, right?
Yeah. But I mean that kind of harkens to the thing where like maybe people having entered burials indicated that there was something precious or something special there, that they needed aid, or that they needed help, or that it showed their connection to older generations or relatives, or it was kind of like, well, man, things are just really sucky right now, but grandma sure did have that really nice, really life-saving pair of brooches that we buried with her. And she probably wouldn't mind if I went and grabbed those because you want me to be okay, right?
Well, exactly. And I'm sure it happened a lot with weapons. If you had a very esteemed warrior, and I imagine when they died, they were buried with their sword or their spear. And I imagine as more so with anything that we talked about, again, going back to like the trowel or a tool, if you have a sword, I imagine that's your fucking sword. Especially if it works well and you kill a lot of people with it.
But that makes sense with the literary sources that we have too, where items and specifically weapons are given actual names and almost treated like individuals.
Because it's anybody who works with anything, they become an attachment to it. Whether it's
a trowel or
whether it's a trowel or a spanner or a snooker cue for a snooker player, like it becomes like an extension of themselves,
like a lucky pick for a guitarist, right?
Yeah, but when it's a sword, like this thing is literally saving your life. So this thing's very important. So you have maybe an extra attachment to it. So it would make sense that you would then bury a very esteemed warrior with his sword. But then 2 generations down the line, you have an invasion or something happens. It's like, there's that really good sword, or even more so if there's like a magical element attached to the sword. It's like,
like how the whole smithing process is just it seems to have been very magically intertwined. The sword is just grows in size. Fun fact, actually, on that note, the guy buried in Gjellestad, in the Gjellestad Ship, which is, as far as my knowledge, one of the biggest burial ships found from the Viking Age. He shows very clear traces of having been in battle for a while and doing this for years. So clear indications of a warrior. No weapons in the burial, as far as we could find. But there was that break-in, though.
Well, there you go. Exactly.
Same with the Oseberg women. Likely very high status women. No jewelry of any kind.
Yeah.
Well, very weird.
Exactly.
But there was that break-in, though.
Yeah.
So it's like, even though we can't say for certain that was taken, it seems quite likely that they would have been buried with those sort of items. Now we can't find them. 2 + 2 equals possibly 4.
Yeah, especially with the Oseberg, like the extravagance has gone into the ship and all the everything that goes along with it. The fact that there is no jewel, it's like, yeah, of course it's been taken because it would have been deemed very valuable to anybody who's coming. So I would feel like that was maybe more of a grave robbing situation. But
or did it mean something? The possession, was the item a piece of power in and of itself? It could definitely be monetary, but just knowing that they didn't necessarily think economy in the way that we think economy. Maybe it could be having that, it's kind of like King Arthur, right? With that specific sword.
Yeah. That's probably like the man in me.
Well, maybe, but that's also what we've been taught, though, isn't it?
No, but it's probably like but that like that male kind of essence that like it's just like, oh yeah, like of course someone's gonna go steal a sword because that's like really cool and you can like stab people with it. But then it's like when you say to the jewelry, it's like I'm like, yeah, that's monetary because it's just pretty. And it's a super shitty way to think, but like that's where my mind went. And then as soon as you said like, oh, maybe it has some like other values, like yeah, it could have. Of course, it could have. It could have had some, whether it's like a magical purpose. Of course, it could have had that value, and that's kind of very introspective for me to think of. Like, why did I go there?
Well, that's fun to hear. But what I think is really valuable too is that I think one doesn't necessarily exclude the other, and I want to be very careful so that I don't imply that profit or something being valuable for monetary reasons or riches in and of itself wasn't necessarily a possibility, because it definitely would have. It's just, again, kind of my wish to broaden, like open more doors and be like, sure, it could have been that, but it could also have been XYZ.
But
maybe
value is very relative as well, isn't it? Because if you've got an enemy at your door and you believe that your great grandfather was buried with a sword given to him by Odin, what the fuck's gold gonna do? But that sword's gonna really get me out of this shit here. So it's, the worth is very much,
it's very situation specific. Kind of the context gives a lot of clues to that. But yeah, I don't know if I did like put together some pictures. I don't know if that's interesting for you to see. Like, we've gone way off the beaten path right now, but
sure, yeah, for a moment there I forgot we even came to speak about a Viking. No, I do love these. I love these episodes where it's been a while since I've had one where I'm just like, fuck time. I don't need to be anywhere. I don't care what's happening. I'm just enjoying the conversation for what it is.
I'm having such a good time too, so that's great.
Yeah, I genuinely can't remember the last time. I think maybe like my Jonas Lorentzen was a good friend of mine. This last time we kind of just sat and spoke and was like, yeah, whatever, however long this happens, like it's fine.
Takes the time it takes.
Yeah, like, but I enjoy that. So also we usually do a Q&A after, but we're probably going to end up going for that long that we might not have time to do the Q&A after.
Well, I mean, if it's a possibility, people can, I guess, I've already seen a couple. Like, they can just start putting questions in the chat, and we can just
let's mix the two together rather than doing like because we do like a Patreon exclusive Q&A. As for anybody listening that has made it,
do whatever works for you guys.
Yeah, that has made it with like an hour,
2.5 hours in.
Yeah. So anybody that's made it this far and they're still listening, usually we do a Q&A, and I'm going to do like the plugs. So we do a Q&A with the guest every week, and they're exclusive to patrons, and you can ask the guests your questions and they will answer them, and they're usually a lot of fun. And you also get the story time with Jonas Lorenz, where we read through a different saga each time, and again, they are a lot of fun. You get the whole back catalog on Patreon. There's tons of old episodes that you can listen to, and it's £3 a month, and it helps kind of keep everything going. It helps Ron fix all our mistakes in post. It helps Alyssa do like all the social media stuff. It really does kind of keep things going. And so yeah, if you can, please take a minute just to go over and look at that. And if not, then just follow us on any social media platform, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, and just like it, share it. It all helps the algorithm think that we're a really good show, I guess, probably. And even more so, just leave us a 5-star rating and a positive review wherever you get your podcasts. And yeah, I think that's it. That's probably about it. But no, it's I do like it when this happens, where it's just a very natural conversation. And I had the feeling this was probably going to turn into a longer episode from when we spoke for 15 minutes before the episode about nothing. So it's just, it happens.
It does happen, doesn't it?
Okay, so where were we before I had to plug?
We were talking about, it was kind of a combination of me having some pictures prepared if people want to see anything from, this is Gjellestad specific, and also if people have any questions that they want me to answer, please. Sure. I don't know if you do it like people put their mic and camera on, or if they just put
usually,
in the chat.
Usually people just type. Yeah. But we can do
whichever.
We can do questions. Or like say a little bit of both. And never going to be able to read this. So Alyssa asked, okay. Did they have
ship cats?
Ships. Oh, okay.
Ship cats.
Ship cats.
Yeah.
Or is that a myth? Yeah. So did they have ship cats, or is that a myth?
I think a little bit of both. Okay, so here's the fun thing. There's not a lot of clear evidence that we have, just from not having a lot of evidence from ships actually doing whatever they did when they were kind of going from some place to the other. And I'm talking physical evidence here, not because there might be stuff in the sagas that I'm not aware of. But the fun part about my answer to that was that from the animal remains in the Oseberg burial, there is logged a cat. Okay. I have reached out to the collection. It's being housed at the University Museum of Bergen. I've reached out, and I'm still trying to get in touch with them because I have questions regarding other stuff. But I don't know what that means. I don't know if it's a bone or if it's a complete skeleton or anything, but there seems to have been a cat in the Oseberg burial. Yeah. Maybe, potentially.
Am I right in thinking that there's a lot of cat-like carvings on the ship?
Not the ship specifically, but the wagon.
On the wagon.
Yeah. Actually, I guess this is the perfect caveat for me to plug the briefly mentioned PhD earlier, which is how me and Bob got to talking about this podcast in the first place.
I bet you regret that.
Oh, not at all. I'm having so much fun. But at the moment, I'm currently working as a PhD researcher for the Museum of Cultural History in Oslo, where I am analyzing all of the decorated material from the Oseberg burial, every single thing that has any art on it.
Oh, nice.
With a specific focus on the textiles, because there's a big revamp of the knowledge that we have of the textiles. So my PhD is textile based, but my goal is to see if there's any sort of stylistic and motif based cohesion between all the different decorated items in the burial, because that's never been done before. It's always been, and I'm talking academically here, because I heard part of I think it was Luciano's episode, one of the latest ones with him, where he talked about the Oseberg quite a bit, and had some really interesting thoughts actually that I needed to jot down.
I can put you in touch.
Yeah, I'd love that actually, because I need to get in touch with him. But
he's a fascinating guy. Like
Children of Ash is just.
And the disappointing thing is when I've spoken to him, like he gets so many doors closed in his face because he's not like a typical scholar. He hasn't gone through like the university. He just gets request after request like shut down. So he would love that. He would.
Yeah, I would really like to talk to him, because I think that he has a bunch of different insights, that also because of he has such his experience is so different to mine. So I'd love to get his thoughts. So essentially my job right now, after Gjellestad, has been to literally just sit down and look at all the stuff with art on it from the Oseberg burial.
What a job.
Bro, it is a lot.
Oh, I bet it's overwhelming at times.
It is a lot, but it is, not to get too personal here, but I don't know how I landed this, because this is literally my dream job. Like I wrote my master's on the carvings of the Oseberg ship.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And everything. So I don't know how I did this, but somehow I did it. But we can probably do a whole separate episode of the art of the Oseberg burial.
Oh, we will. We will. No, but
that would be really fun. But anyway, yeah, there are cats on the wagon.
That's a short answer. That's a short answer. No, it is awesome because sometimes I'm like we're kind of trained to be so modest, I think, at times. And it's nice to sit back and just be like, yeah, I did this really, I got to kind of where I wanted. And people like, I don't know if this is a British thing where you feel like if you celebrate your achievements, people are gonna be like, oh, you're an asshole. But I found like the opposite of where people find like joy in that. It's like, oh, maybe I can do that too. Or I can get to like where I want. So I think it's nice to say this is my dream job and I got there. It's like, I have to sometimes think it's like I get to sit down and talk with some of the most fascinating people I've met in my entire life. And yeah, I don't make like loads of money from it, but I don't lose money from it either. Like I get enough.
It's the same with the PhD, to be completely honest.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah, but like I get some money that pays for like it to run itself. So like it pays for like all the people involved to do their bit, and I just get to sit here and have fascinating conversations, and I love it. I think, how the fuck did I talk myself into this? I was just like a guy interested in like Viking stuff who had no formal education, but I just teamed up with or got speaking to Matthias, and we got on and we were like, oh, let's just start a podcast. And then it kind of grew and grew and grew. And it's like, but these things happen. And I think it's
freaking awesome.
Yeah. People find like their own enjoyment in that of like, oh, well, if that happened for them, that can happen for me too. So
I think that's a really good point.
To celebrate the fact you got to your dream job.
Yeah, thank you. I will. I think it's very, academia especially is a very hard place to be. In a sense that there are lots of competition for the one bone. And so I want to make sure that when I talk about it, it's a very good reminder to be open and honest about the fact that, yes, this is my dream job. And I'm incredibly grateful and very proud of myself for having landed it. I just want to make sure that when I do touch on it, that it is not something that can in any way, shape, or form be misconstrued as something that I've taken for granted.
Yeah. Okay,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's not that I think that me having this position somehow makes me more than anything else. Because there is this unfortunate thing, which I think is becoming less and less common now, thankfully. Just from my brief experience, I only started my PhD closing up on a year now, actually. But there is this unfortunate stereotype of, in some sense, becoming a bit more detached when you do climb the academic ladder, which I think, again, it's becoming less common. But I just, again, I feel like I might be getting a wee bit personal here, kind of, but at the same time, that's one of the things that I love, for example, about doing this podcast, to make sure that I stay in touch, and that reaching out and talking to people and just being very open and honest about where I'm at. Not that has anything to do with the Viking Age necessarily, but
we're way past worrying about that. If anybody's got this far in, then they're stuck, Thanks
for hanging in there, guys.
They're in for the long haul. Some people will. No, it's a lot of fun, and there are people who like just want to listen to like the super history bit, but there are a lot of people that take a lot of comfort in just hearing people. Some of my favorite podcasts are people just having really honest conversations. Yeah, I just find such comfort in that. So it's nice to just be like in that, and I get it. Like I was I was a plumber like for 13 years, and then somehow made a business from carving drinking horns, and then got into the podcast. It's like I never expected that to happen, and I'm like super proud of how it happened. But like, life just takes you on these weird little journeys, I guess.
Yeah, I guess I was wondering whether or not I should mention this earlier today when I was kind of like low key prepping a bit for this, but I started laughing because I remembered something so I started my bachelor's in archaeology at the University of Oslo in 2013, And I've moved around quite a bit in my youth and was very focused on kind of, I just wanted to get back to Norway and get back to Oslo and kind of start with whatever was going to be my life. So I just went straight into university. And luckily for me, it worked out. Archaeology kind of turned out to be exactly what I wanted. Not that I knew what I wanted, but here we are. And the thing that made me chuckle earlier today was I remember very early on in my BA, I think I must have mentioned this several times as well, which makes it even more cringeworthy and hilarious, the situation being what it is. But I remember being I guess not uncommonly kind of a bit of a cocky 20-year-old, 19, 20-year-old.
Yeah, we all are.
And on at least one, but likely several occasions, I do remember uttering something along the lines of, oh, well, whatever I do end up specializing, it's definitely not going to be the Viking Age because everyone does that. And it's so overrated and blah, blah, blah. I don't know what other kind of crap I said, but something along those lines. And then lo and behold, like 3 or 4 months pass by and I get a tip that they're looking for new tour guides at the Viking Ship Museum. And I was like, oh, I needed a new part-time job. I was a student. I needed some side income. So I applied and I had the interview and was very lucky to get the job. And I started doing tours and I loved doing tours and I loved communicating with especially kids. We had a lot of school classes. So high school kids and 6th graders, which was when the Viking Age was on the school curriculum in history. And I just fell more and more in love with the collection there and just the Oseberg ship. Yeah. And like, here we are. What do you know? I specialize in the Viking Age.
Yeah. It got you. It got you.
It got me.
But it is such a beautiful place. And I can't wait until it's open to go back
I'm so excited about the new museum. So excited about it. I remember my boss at the time, once she was like, so there's like a lot of dust underneath the Oseberg ship. It needs to be vacuumed, but that is very close to the ship. And we don't want to make our port cleaners responsible for any unfortunate accidents. So I know this is kind of a big ask, but would you mind coming in like at 6 o'clock in the morning one of these days and just like vacuuming underneath the Oseberg ship? And I just went, yep. And I am not a morning person. If I can sleep till 10 every day, that would be my dream life. But I remember I woke up and I went there and I was so excited. And I hate cleaning. And I remember I had this picture on my phone. But how many people
get to do that?
Exactly. And I got in there and I got this like old ass vacuum cleaner and I sat underneath the Oseberg and like pulled out the extension cord and everything. And I just sat there going like, I'm getting paid to vacuum under the world's best preserved Viking ship. What is this? What is this world?
Of course, yeah. Why wouldn't you want to do that? That's
neither before nor since have I ever been that excited about vacuuming anything.
But it's like, how many people get to do that? It's not many. So you have to take these opportunities.
When you have to grab them. If the time is right and the situation allows, go for it.
Yeah, wherever they come. Well, yeah, I love the museum and the collection there. It is just it's so magical that there's no surprise that it hooked you and pulled you in because
you didn't even have to work that hard.
No, when this is going to sound really mean, but again, to go back to my Durham experience in Durham Cathedral, it's one of the prettiest cathedrals I've ever seen in my life. It might be the most breathtaking cathedral.
I have to go see it.
It is absolutely beautiful. But in the basement, kind of underneath it, I think it used to be like the old kitchen. They've put they spent a lot of money on an exhibition and they have the most prized artifacts in this, like, I guess it's like a air controlled room, but even everything in there is still behind glass.
Sure. Yeah.
But the whole room, you have to like press a button to get through the door, and like it's all very high tech. And there's people who show you around, and there's the casket of St. Cuthbert there, and it's like the remains of a wooden box, and it's got like these little carvings on it of people, and the little guy's telling me, he's like, look, can you imagine how long this took to make? And it sounds so horrible because like I looked at it and like they're just a bit naff. Like they're just a bit shit. And like I appreciate it sounds so horrible because I completely appreciate this casket's worth.
100%.
I get it. Like it has such historical value. And like there is some skill there's some skill that's gone into.
It's probably better than I would have managed to do it, probably.
But it's probably
that being
not.
said,
it's probably not
okay.
because I'm not very good at drawing, and I feel like I could have done this. And it's so mean to say. And I'll try to get was to put a picture up of this casket for when. Well, they're really tight on people taking pictures, but I assume I can find one online. I'll see if we can put it up when we post this. But it just looks like the outline of like people, but not very well done. And it's like a scene, like there is some skill to it, but then it's like it's from a time period that's not far from like the Oseberg ship or like the beast heads that are there. There's some of my favorite ones, like the wooden beast
heads. Animal heads. Yeah.
Like it's not far from that, or like the wagon. And maybe I've been spoiled because I've seen things like that, and I'm just like, I just felt so sorry for the little guy who was like, look, can you imagine how long he's taken? I'm like,
it's not the Oslo though.
I mean, no offense, but this is a bit shit compared to like.
It's a solid A for effort.
yeah, maybe. But it was like kind of that. I just had that thought in my mind. Obviously, I'm very respectful in the time. I'm like, yeah, this is the like
sure.
Yeah, I'm like, this is the best thing I've ever seen.
But you do get a bit jaded though, don't you? When you've seen so many incredible pieces of artistry and craftsmanship, and then you see this and you're like, well, I don't doubt that it took a long time and people really put their best foot forward, but then you have this other thing that you've seen before and you're like, well,
but that's it. Like I think it was like the week after I had Luciano as well, and he was like showing us the Kamen casket and like all these detailed and these tiny little ivory pieces that have been like so delicately carved, and I'm just like, it's the time periods I'm not sure exactly when the St. Cuthbert casket was, so I can't say exactly, but they're not far off. But it was just so interesting, like this kind of Christian perspective of like, look how amazing this is, and it's like it's not that good when you go and look at what these people over here were creating. Like that is it. It's just it honestly looks like this tickled me. Have you ever seen that meme for like artists where it's like a really shit drawing of a horse, and it's like if you pay for like $10 you get like this, it's like a kid's drawing it, and then it like merges into like if you pay like a professional, it's like a really super hyper realistic. It's like that's what it was. It was like the Cuthbert casket was this, and like it's like the Viking age like stuff and like Osberg and like the Kamen casket and all that kind of stuff is like is over here, and it's like
freaking amazing.
There's no comparison to it, but
can't hold a candle to it. No.
Yeah, and it's just like it was such a funny moment when I was looking. I was like, "Oh, bless you! Like you think this is good." And then, like, obviously, had the casket itself has such historical importance. But
sure.
It was the way he made out such importance of the carvings on it, and like how good they were, and how he must have taken an artist like so long. And I can't wait to send you a picture of this after.
I am so excited now. Like my favorite disc came to mind where I picked it up and talked to my sister about this quite frequently, where it's like a Southern American saying where essentially like the best way to diss someone to their face, just say, bless your heart.
You know what?
And I'm like, it reminded me of that type of situation.
It's so funny you say that because that's what I do to all online trolls. Like
bless your heart.
If anybody ever trolls me, I'm just like, bless you.
Yeah.
Bless you. And it's just like, it's so much fun because it just kind of like shuts down just like you can't say anything else now.
I'm done.
Okay, you had some pictures to show us because
pictures.
We are way over 2.5 hours now.
Yeah. All right, let me open this particular folder. So let me see. Pictures ready.
I think this will easily be the longest episode I've ever done. It's fine. Yeah. So also just as a reminder, if anybody wants to check out the photos that you're going to pull up, you can watch all the episodes on YouTube. So obviously most people just listen to the episodes, but it's just literally not a mythology podcast on YouTube. You can skip to the 2.5 hour mark and then see all the stuff I had pulled up. And that's not just for this episode, that's for the episode with Luciano. There was a ton in that. Leszek pulled up tons in the last episode as well. So for most episodes, there are some visual aspects as well.
So this was just a random one that I was that I pulled up right now. But essentially, this was a bit of a bad one to start with. But this was essentially the photo studio that I had in one of the barracks.
Okay.
So
is that a piece of paper just curled up?
Yep.
Okay.
Piece of paper taped to the window.
No expense spared.
Yeah, which turned into, they're all a bit in a jumble here, but let me see if I can get to. So which turned into this.
Oh, well, it worked.
Or this. So this is the skull fragment that I was mentioning earlier. It's like, I don't know if you can see, but it's like tiny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like, very, very small. But I guess these are a couple of beads that were parts of beads that we found as part of sieving through the soil that covered the ship. So we were very meticulous about going through all the topsoil, even though it had been plowed. So we don't know necessarily if these specific bead shards were originally from the Gjellestad burial themselves, but they came from this field, likely. So maybe they're from the burial.
Mm-hmm.
And then, this is the site, basically, when we'd gotten pretty far along. And all those walls, I guess you could call them, that you can see going down and across are not actual ship parts, but they're what we call like profiles that we kept in place to see how the soil layers developed afterwards. And that is one of the ways where we could distinguish, for example, trenches made by the people who made their way inside, where we saw very clearly, like, let's see if I can zoom in here, like something happens right here. There is a very different patch in the dirt. I don't remember exactly what that was.
Yeah.
But something like this tells us that something else is happening here. And let's see, where are we? So I'm just trying to orient myself. This is the back. Well, yeah. So these kind of clunky things that you're seeing right here, I don't know if you can see the arrow or the hand that I'm kind of gesturing with.
Yeah, no, I can.
This is the remains of the burial chamber.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of stands out from the rest of the semi kind of neatly-ish dug stuff in the way that we tried to preserve the shape of stuff when we realized what it was.
Yeah.
And I should have opened these a bit more in a bit more organized way, but here we are. Not fully zoomed out. Cool. And here's like from above. This was a bit earlier, and this is actually kind of neat because you see the semblance of the outline of the ship going kind of like the cat's pupil that I mentioned earlier, going along here. And these I guess you could call them bridges of a sort, were quite an ingenious, pretty much invention of a sort from one of the assistant managers of the excavation, where we had to figure out some sort of way to excavate inside the ship without necessarily having to step in it all the time. And we were like workshopping so many ideas until this dude, whose dad is a carpenter, I think, he was like, well, I can just nail together a couple pieces of like wood and then we can just walk across it. And if we have these planks like flanking the ship, then the weight would be distributed along them and not on the actual ship. So that was kind of cool. And the reason I wanted to show this picture was to kind of just to give an overview of inside the tent. I also want to mention that this was taken by a very talented photojournalist and not by me, myself, and I. But you see these like plastic cups that are just layered over here. They're just party cups that we cut in half, but that we used to put over the rivets when we found them.
All right.
In situ in situ meaning like in the ground where they were originally placed, to make sure that we didn't accidentally step on them, because they were just so many of them, and to try to shield them as much as we could before we could extract them.
Mm-hmm. Was this before the extraction tool was made?
Yes. So the extraction tool, this goes back to a bit of my jumbled explanation earlier, but the extraction thing of the rivets was the very last thing that we did. So the extraction of the rivets, that was when we were done with everything else. That's when that started. And that finished in, what was it? October 2021, I think. So up until then, the rivets were there covered by these little plastic cups, which was a bit fun. That's where we started, right? The beads and the skull fragment. And here, this is one of the coolest things that we found. So this is a cluster of glass beads, and I think the one in the middle there is an amber bead. I'm not quite sure. These are still, as far as I know, they're still most of what we took up from or extracted from the sites. We tried as much as possible to keep them contained in the soil to make sure we didn't lose stuff, and also valuable information because of how little, kind of, if you compare it to Oseberg, for example, like how little there was in comparison. We wanted to make sure that every single piece of detail that we could possibly manage to get our hands on, we'd have the opportunity to do that. So these beads were taken out in just a block of soil to make sure that they could be properly excavated in a lab. For example, if there turned out to be any sort of string in between them or that type of stuff.
Okay,
now we don't,
of course.
Yeah. We don't know why they're in a cluster like that. I had a speculation that didn't quite catch on, so I don't know. But I was like, what if they were in a pouch of some sort, maybe?
Okay, yeah, maybe.
Maybe. Or they could just be lumped. As far as I can, like, just lumped in a little cluster. I'm pretty sure they were inside the chamber, the little house.
Yeah.
So
it would feel like there would be some reason for them to be clustered, though, whether it's a pouch or like a string.
Yeah, for some sort of reason they're organized that way.
Yeah, it would feel like they wouldn't just be thrown there.
No, I have a bit of a better picture of them that I can see if I can find earlier. But here, essentially, you see like the bridges, and here we're getting pretty far down. So here you have all the rivets like just lining.
Yeah, there's so many.
So here, this is a picture of me essentially lying upside down on another bridge, taking like a picture from below of my colleagues working. So this was essentially how they worked for like 7.5 hours a day. They're just incredible amount of effort, and like they started doing a bunch of different stretches and stuff because their necks would get so stiff.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, I bet.
And like how deep down they had to reach to grab hold of stuff. So yeah. And here is the ship when we were kind of finished-ish in a way of excavating it before we started taking out the rivets. Wow. So yeah, here you can kind of see it, and
it's clearly a ship shape.
Yeah, it is. It very much is. So here, most of those little walls have been taken down, but some of them are left, like the one that I'm hovering over right now, as far as I can remember. They seemed to be mostly decomposed actual ship parts, which was why they were left in that manner, just to kind of see how they developed throughout the ship. That could tell us how it was constructed and put together. And I just really love how clear it all is, like the rivets here all in a row.
Yeah,
like especially this is likely the front end or the prow. And just now this isn't super high resolution, but you can just see all just the little clumps dotting it there. And there was I don't know if they've been able to go any further with this, but do you see how it kind of curves here at the end here, even though there aren't any nails, like the color curves? There was a speculation that the upper part of the prow had at some point maybe collapsed or broken off.
Okay, yeah.
And then fallen into the ground, and then and that's why the color is like that.
I mean, that would make sense as it gets older and decays, and the weight of the mound on it. Because even if it wasn't disturbed until the 1800s, it's still been in there 800 years, longer,
It absolutely, and just
1,000 years.
yeah, like you said, the weight of the mound itself, just with both the Oseberg and the Gokstad as well, they were, even though they're so well preserved as they are, they were both shattered by the weight of the mound, so they had to be puzzled back together.
Absolutely.
And then as kind of a last little tidbit, I don't know if you can see, I don't want to make sure that I assume too much, but right over here, the patch is a bit darker.
Yes.
So now we're looking at the ship from the other angle from what I showed you previously when I mentioned the burial chamber. And the reason likely why this is darker is that there's more wood here, and this is the chamber.
Okay, right.
And it's a very kind of common.
There's just like a density thing.
And also the stage of decay. And oak has a very particular way of decomposing where it becomes almost kind of like a charcoal color. So that's why it's like blackish, and a bit further like towards us here, you can almost kind of, I mean, I guess to me it's very clear, but so I completely understand if this is difficult for anyone to see, but where I'm like tracing the cursor here, this is also like you can almost, with the blackish color and the row of rivets trailing it, you can almost like see the planks of the ship going upwards.
Yeah.
So these are essentially the walls of the burial chamber. And this is the sit. And I think if I don't misremember completely, the patches here of where there's suddenly like light dirt in like going into the ship, almost like someone's like grabbing into it, are, unless I'm completely mistaken, are traces of the break-ins that I mentioned.
Oh, okay. So that's the tunnels.
Yep. Parts of them. So I think this is the more recent one. I think the plank that I mentioned that had been kind of shattered or broken is like here or here somewhere. It's kind of hard to see from this overview, but I think the older one, again, I might be getting a call from my previous boss. Him going, what are you talking about? This is all bullshit. But I think the older trench from the Viking Age kind of went along here somewhere. That one's a bit harder to see, especially from this picture.
Yeah.
But yeah, there you have it. It's just, I know it's just a patch of slightly darker earth, but to me it's quite beautiful.
No, but you can tell a lot from it.
Yeah,
you can tell a lot from the different patches, and it's fascinating to see how you can pick out the different bits, and like I say, where the chamber is, and the little roots in. It's not just a patch of dirt.
No, it isn't. But it's, I mean, it most definitely isn't. But I think well, I'm glad to hear that it actually does translate that way to you as well, and hopefully the audience, because it's just, to me, it is a bit absurd that it survived, even in the state that it's in. The fact that we can even see it is just like, wow.
It's a snapshot in history. And
it is. It 100% is.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Also, just for credit's sake, I just wanted to quickly mention that all the pictures that I'm showing right now are owned by the Museum of Cultural History in Oslo. So please don't use for that permission.
Yeah, no. Don't use them. Nobody. Quick. Okay, I have a very restless puppy. So we are close to 3 hours in. So it's been
great.
Hey, Margaret, it's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed this. Like I say, we've covered a lot of topics. We've gone off topic, but we've also like speculated a lot, which is a lot of fun for me. And I think people enjoy that kind of just exploring and seeing where things go, and just throwing around ideas of what could have been.
100%.
It is a lot of fun. So yeah, thank you very much. Where can people follow you if you want anybody to follow you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again so much for having me. This was so much fun. If anyone wants to follow me, I'm a bit lame on social media right now, but I do plan on doing stuff in the future, whenever that is. But you can follow me at Archaeomags with a K, so RKO Mags on Instagram and on YouTube. The YouTube channel is pretty dead right now, but I'm planning on doing stuff with it. So yeah,
do. Perfect. If you want to follow me, it's Daniel_Farrand1 on fucking one. You need to get rid of that one. Obviously, the business Hans Bowden or just not Mythology podcast, not on any of the channels. Yeah, like I said, this was a long one. If you made it this far, then thank you very much. I appreciate it. It was I had a lot of fun, and usually if I'm having fun, then people enjoy listening to it. So yeah, thank you very much. And I'm sure we will talk again in the future. And that's little.
I
Rocco.
certainly hope so. This was so much fun. Thanks again.
I don't know if you heard Rocco kicking off in the background there. He's ready for a wee lesson.
Oh,
well, perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you for everybody for listening. Take care, and we'll speak soon.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.